The mist clung to the Irish hills like a shroud, curling around the jagged spires of St. Bridget's Convent. The ancient structure loomed in the darkness, its stained glass windows fractured, glowing faintly under a sickle moon. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wax and damp stone. Sister Clara Kane, a novice of 28, knelt in her sparse cell, her fingers tracing the worn beads of her rosary. Her auburn hair was hidden beneath her veil, but her hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. She had come to this remote convent seeking solace after her mother's death, but solace was not what she found. A sound pierced the silence, not a scream, but a low, guttural moan that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Clara froze, her breath catching. The moan grew louder, weaving through the corridors like a serpent. She stood, clutching her rosary, and stepped into the shadowed hallway. The candles flickered, casting distorted shapes on the walls, shapes that seemed to move. Her heart pounded as she followed the sound, her footsteps echoing on the cold stone. The moan led her to the convent's infirmary, where she found Sister Ruth, her closest friend, trembling outside the door. "Clara," Ruth whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's the girl. She's not herself." Clara pushed open the door. In the dim light, a child, Evelyn, an orphan of 7, sat upright on a cot, her eyes wide and unseeing. Her lips moved, chanting words in a language Clara didn't recognize, guttural and ancient. The air grew frigid, and the shadows seemed to pulse. Clara approached, her voice soft but firm. "Evelyn, it's Sister Clara. You're safe." Evelyn's head snapped toward her, her voice dropping to a hiss. The vow stirs. She wakes. Before Clara could react, the cot rattled violently, and Evelyn collapsed, gasping. Mother Superior Beatrice, a towering figure with a face carved from stone, swept into the room. Her eyes, sharp as flint, fixed on Clara. "Take the child to her room, Sister," Beatrice commanded. "Speak of this to no one." Clara nodded, but her gaze lingered on the silver medallion around Beatrice's neck, etched with a symbol she couldn't place. As she led Evelyn away, the shadows seemed to watch. Dawn broke over St. Bridget's, but the mist refused to lift. Clara stood in the courtyard, her breath visible in the chill air, as the rumble of a motorcycle cut through the silence. A man dismounted, his leather jacket stark against the convent's grey stone. Father Daniel Shea, 35, had a rugged jaw and eyes that carried a storm. Sent by the Vatican to investigate disturbances, he was an enigma, part priest, part rebel. Clara greeted him, her voice steady despite the unease his presence stirred. "Father Shea," she said, "welcome to St. Bridget's." "Call me Daniel," he replied, his gaze lingering on her. "I hear this place has secrets." Clara's lips tightened. "Only the kind that come with old stones." Their exchange was cut short by Beatrice, who emerged from the cloister, her presence like a cold wind. She welcomed Daniel with practiced courtesy, but her eyes betrayed suspicion. As they walked toward the chapel, Daniel leaned close to Clara, his voice low. "Something's wrong here, Sister. I can feel it. Can you?" Clara hesitated. The memory of Evelyn's chant gnawed at her, but she only nodded. In the chapel, Daniel surveyed the cracked pews and faded frescoes, his fingers brushing a strange carving on the altar, a circle bisected by a jagged line. Clara noticed his hand tremble, as if the symbol meant something to him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, The weight of their shared unease felt like a bond. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lit a candle and opened her mother's old prayer book, hoping for comfort. Tucked between the pages was a photograph of a young woman in a nun's habit, her face eerily similar to Clara's. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "St. Bridget's, 1947. Forgive me." Clara's heart raced. Her mother had never spoken of this place. What had she left behind? The convent's library was a labyrinth of dust and secrets, its shelves sagging under ancient tomes. Clara, tasked with cataloguing manuscripts, worked alone, the silence broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the walls. Ruth joined her, her youthful face pale after the previous night's events. "Do you think Evelyn's possessed?" Ruth asked, her voice trembling. Clara shook her head. "She's a child, Ruth. Scared, maybe sick. Not possessed." But doubt gnawed at her. She turned to a stack of journals, their leather covers cracked with age. One caught her eye, its pages brittle but intact. It belonged to Sister Margaret, a nun from the 1940s. The entry spoke of a pact made to protect the convent from an unnamed evil, sealed in the crypt below. The final entry was scrawled in haste, "The price is too high. God forgive us." Clara's pulse quickened. She slipped the journal into her habit and continued working, but the air grew heavy, as if the library itself were watching. A book fell from a shelf, its pages open to an illustration of a cloaked figure with hollow eyes. Clara slammed it shut, her hands shaking. Outside, she found Seamus, the convent's grizzled groundskeeper, tending the overgrown cemetery. His weathered face held a warning as he spoke of the convent's history, nuns who vanished, whispers of rituals in the crypt. "Some doors are best left locked, sister," he said, pointing to a rusted gate leading underground. That evening, Clara shared her findings with Daniel over tea in the refectory. His expression darkened as she mentioned the pact. "I've seen things like this before," he said, his voice low. "In Rome. A convent, a child, a shadow that wasn't human." He didn't elaborate, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. Clara felt a pull toward him, a dangerous warmth she couldn't name. The convent's bell tolled midnight, its clang reverberating through the stone corridors. Clara, unable to sleep, wandered to the chapel, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. The air was thick, the candles guttering despite the absence of wind. She knelt before the altar, praying for guidance, when a whisper slithered through the darkness. "Clara, she sees you." She spun around, but the chapel was empty. The whisper came again, closer, from the shadows behind the crucifix. Heart pounding, she approached, her candle casting wild shadows. The crucifix trembled, and a trickle of dark liquid seeped from Christ's carved wounds. Not blood, ink, black and viscous, pooling on the floor. Clara stumbled back, her candle extinguishing. The darkness pulsed, and a figure emerged, a spectral nun, her face obscured by a tattered veil, her hands claw-like. "The vow binds you," it rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers. Clara screamed, and the figure vanished as footsteps echoed behind her. Daniel burst in, his face taut with concern. "What happened?" he demanded, steadying her. Clara recounted the vision, her voice shaking. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's begun," he said. "Whatever's here, it's waking up." They searched the chapel, finding a hidden panel behind the altar. Inside was a small, locked box engraved with the same symbol Daniel had noticed earlier. Before they could open it, Beatrice appeared, her eyes blazing. "You meddle in things you don't understand," she hissed. "Leave the past buried." Clara clutched the box, defiance rising. As Beatrice stormed out, Daniel whispered, "We're close, Clara. Too close." Their hands brushed, a fleeting touch that felt like a sin. Outside, the mist thickened, and somewhere in the convent, Evelyn's voice began to chant again. The locked box from the chapel weighed heavily in Clara's hands, its engraved symbol, a circle split by a jagged line, seeming to pulse under her touch. She hid it beneath her habit, her heart racing as she and Daniel slipped out of the chapel into the moonless night. The convent's corridors were silent, but the air felt charged, as if the stones themselves held their breath. Clara's mind churned with questions. What was the vow the spectral nun had mentioned? And why had Beatrice been so furious? In the refectory, where a single candle flickered, Clara and Daniel examined the box. Its surface was cold, unnaturally so, and the lock resisted Daniel's attempts to pry it open. "This isn't ordinary," he muttered, his voice low. "I've seen relics like this, sealed with intent." His fingers brushed Clara's as he handed her the box, and she felt a jolt, a forbidden warmth that made her look away. "We need to know what's inside," Clara said, steadying her voice. "It's connected to Evelyn, I'm sure of it." Daniel nodded, but his eyes held a shadow of doubt. He told her of his last assignment, a convent in Sicily where a similar symbol had marked a cursed artifact. "It cost lives," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let that happen here." Clara saw the pain etched in his face, and for a moment, she wanted to reach for him, to ease his burden. Instead, she clutched her rosary, anchoring herself to her vows. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Sister Ruth stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Clara, it's Evelyn again. She's in the garden, and she's digging." Clara and Daniel exchanged a glance, the box forgotten for the moment. They followed Ruth into the misty courtyard, where Evelyn knelt in the dirt, her small hands clawing at the earth. Her nightgown was smeared with mud, and her lips moved silently, as if in prayer, or something darker. Clara knelt beside her. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" The girl's eyes, glassy and distant, met Clara's. "She told me to find it," Evelyn whispered. "The key to the vow." Clara's blood ran cold. In the dirt, Evelyn had uncovered a rusted iron ring, part of a trapdoor leading to the crypt Seamus had warned about. Daniel pulled the ring, revealing a stone staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below smelled of decay, and a faint whisper echoed up, calling Clara's name. The crypt's entrance gaped like a wound in the earth, its darkness swallowing the light of Clara's lantern. Daniel insisted on going first, his pistol, a relic of his unconventional priesthood, hidden beneath his jacket. Clara followed, clutching the locked box, while Ruth stayed above with Evelyn, her prayers a faint murmur. The stairs were slick with moss, and the walls bore carvings of anguished faces, their eyes seeming to follow Clara's every step. The air grew colder, thicker, as if resisting their intrusion. At the bottom, the crypt opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids cracked and stained. In the center stood a circular altar, etched with the same symbol as the box. Clara's breath caught as she approached, her lantern casting flickering shadows that seemed to writhe. "This is no ordinary crypt," she whispered. "It's a place of ritual." Daniel's flashlight swept the room, revealing a pile of bones in a corner, human, but arranged in a deliberate pattern, like a warning. He cursed under his breath, his hand tightening on his pistol. "We're not alone," he said, his voice tense. Clara felt it too, a presence, heavy and malevolent, watching from the darkness. The locked box in her hands grew colder, almost burning her skin. As they searched for clues, Clara found a faded inscription on the altar, "Per sanguinem ligatur," Latin for, "By blood, it is bound." Her mother's prayer book flashed in her mind, the photograph of the nun at St. Bridget's. Had her mother been part of this? Before she could voice her thoughts, the crypt trembled, and a low growl echoed from the shadows. The lantern flickered, and the spectral nun from the chapel appeared, her veiled face now partially visible, revealing a decayed, eyeless horror. "Leave this place," the figure rasped, its voice a chorus of screams. "The vow claims all." The bones in the corner rattled, assembling into a grotesque form that lurched toward them. Daniel fired, the shots echoing, but the creature kept coming. Clara grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the stairs as the crypt shook violently. They barely escaped, the trapdoor slamming shut behind them, sealing the horror below, for now. Back in the courtyard, Clara and Daniel caught their breath, the mist curling around them like a living thing. Evelyn sat silently, clutching Ruth's hand, her eyes fixed on the trapdoor. Clara's mind raced, the inscription and the spectral nun's words looping in her thoughts. The locked box, now tucked inside her cell, felt like a ticking bomb. She needed answers, and she knew where to start. She found Seamus in the cemetery, tending a grave marked only by a weathered cross. The old groundskeeper's eyes narrowed as Clara approached, Daniel at her side. "I told you to leave the crypt be," Seamus growled, his voice thick with the weight of years. But Clara's resolve was iron. She pressed him about the convent's history, the pact mentioned in Sister Margaret's journal, and the symbol that haunted her. Reluctantly, Seamus spoke. In the 1940s, during the war, St. Bridget's had been a refuge for orphans, and a prison for nuns who had sinned. A group of sisters, led by a woman named Sister Agnes, had made a desperate bargain to protect the convent from a malevolent force that plagued the land. They called it the Wraith, Seamus said, his voice low. A demon that fed on despair. They bound it with blood, but the cost was steep. He pointed to the grave. Agnes paid it. So did others. Clara's heart sank. The photograph of her mother, had she been one of those nuns? Daniel's hand brushed her shoulder, a silent gesture of support that sent a shiver through her. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on Seamus's words. He warned that the Wraith's binding was weakening, and Evelyn's presence was no coincidence. "That girl's tied to it," he said. "Mark my words, she's the key, or the sacrifice." As they left the cemetery, Clara noticed Beatrice watching from a window, a medallion glinting in the moonlight. The Mother Superior's gaze was a blade, cutting through Clara's resolve. Back in her cell, Clara opened her mother's prayer book again, finding a new clue, a pressed flower, its petals stained with what looked like blood, tucked beside a note in her mother's handwriting, "The vow is a lie." That night, Clara dreamed of her mother, standing in the crypt, her habit stained with blood. "Run, Clara," her mother whispered, her face dissolving into the wraith's eyeless visage. Clara woke with a start, her cell plunged into darkness. The locked box, hidden beneath her bed, hummed softly, as if alive. She lit a candle, her hands trembling, and knelt to pray, but the words felt hollow. A scream shattered the silence, Ruth's voice, from the dormitory. Clara ran, her bare feet slapping the cold stone, and found Ruth crumpled in the hallway, her face clawed with deep, bleeding gashes. Evelyn stood nearby, her eyes vacant, a shard of broken glass in her hand. "She made me," Evelyn whispered, dropping the glass. Clara gathered the girl in her arms, her mind reeling. Ruth moaned, incoherent, as other nuns arrived, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Daniel appeared, helping Clara carry Ruth to the infirmary. As they bandaged her wounds, he whispered, "This is the wraith's work. It's testing us." Clara nodded, her fear giving way to determination. She showed Daniel the note from her mother's prayer book, its words a chilling warning. "If the vow is a lie," she said, "then everything Beatrice has told us is suspect." They resolved to confront Beatrice, but as they left the infirmary, the convent's bell tolled, a single, mournful note that seemed to shake the walls. The candles in the hallway extinguished, and the wraith appeared at the far end, its form more solid, its veil now a tattered shroud. "You cannot break what is eternal," it hissed, gliding toward them. Clara clutched Daniel's arm, and they fled, the wraith's laughter echoing behind them. In the chaos, Clara realized the box was no longer in her cell, someone, or something, had taken it. The convent's corridors seemed to close in around Clara as she and Daniel fled the wraith's chilling laughter. The realization that the locked box, her only tangible link to the vow, was gone sent a spike of panic through her. She led Daniel to her cell, where the floorboards beneath her bed were bare, the box's absence a gaping wound. "Someone took it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Or something." Daniel's face was grim, his hand still gripping his pistol. "Beatrice," he said. "She's been watching us too closely." Clara nodded, her fear hardening into resolve. The Mother Superior's cryptic warnings and the medallion she wore suggested she knew more than she let on. But confronting her now, in the dead of night, with the wraith prowling, was a risk they couldn't take. Instead, they returned to the infirmary to check on Ruth. The young nun lay still, her face bandaged, her breathing shallow. Clara sat beside her, guilt gnawing at her. Ruth had been her confidant, her light in this dark place, and now she was a casualty of Clara's quest. Daniel placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, his touch steadying her. "This isn't your fault," he said softly. "But we need to move fast. The wraith's getting stronger." Clara's eyes fell on Ruth's rosary, clutched in her hand. A memory surfaced, Ruth mentioning a hidden archive in the convent's attic, a place where old records were kept. "If the box is gone," Clara said, "maybe the archive has answers." Daniel agreed, but as they prepared to leave, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the flickering hallway. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "It's in the tower. She hides it there." Clara knelt before her. "Who, Evelyn? Who hides it?" But the girl's eyes clouded, and she swayed, collapsing into Clara's arms. Daniel checked her pulse, his expression tense. "She's burning up," he said. "Whatever's in her, it's fighting to get out." They carried Evelyn to a cot, trying to find a box before the wraith struck again. As they left, Clara felt a chill, as if the convent itself were warning her to turn back. The convent's bell tower loomed at the far end of the cloister, its spiral staircase shrouded in cobwebs and shadow. Clara and Daniel climbed, their lanterns casting jagged beams on the damp stone walls. The air grew thinner, oppressive, and the faint hum of the stolen box echoed in Clara's mind, as if calling her. She clutched her mother's prayer book, the blood-stained flower inside a reminder of the stakes. Her mother's note, "The vow is a lie," burned in her thoughts. At the top, they found a locked door, its wood carved with the same circle and jag symbol that haunted the convent. Daniel forced it open, revealing a small, circular room cluttered with relics, cracked statues, faded tapestries, and a wooden chest in the center. The locked box sat atop it, its surface glinting in the lantern light. Clara reached for it, but Daniel grabbed her arm. "Wait," he whispered. "It's too easy." He was right. The room felt alive, the shadows shifting unnaturally. Clara's lantern flickered, and a low moan filled the air, rising to a scream. The wraith materialized, its tattered veil fluttering as if caught in an unseen wind. Its eyeless face turned toward Clara, and its voice was a blade. "You seek to undo what cannot be broken." The relics in the room levitated, spinning in a chaotic whirlwind. Daniel shoved Clara behind him, firing at the wraith, but the bullets passed through it, splintering the walls. Clara's eyes locked on the box. She lunged, grabbing it as the wraith's claws slashed at her, tearing her sleeve and grazing her arm. Pain seared through her, but she held tight, sprinting for the door with Daniel at her side. The staircase shook, stones crumbling. As they descended, the wraith's screams echoing behind them. They burst into the cloister, collapsing in the mist, the box clutched to Clara's chest. Blood trickled from her wound, and Daniel tore a strip from his shirt to bandage it, his hands gentle but urgent. "We can't keep running," Clara said, her voice fierce despite the pain. "We need to open it." Daniel nodded, but his eyes held a warning. "Whatever's inside," he said, "it's what the wraith fears, and what Beatrice is protecting." As they caught their breath, the convent's bell tolled again, a signal that time was running out. With the box secured, Clara and Daniel retreated to the attic archive Ruth had mentioned, a dusty warren of shelves and crates hidden above the dormitory. The air was thick with the scent of moldy paper, and the floor creaked under their weight. Clara's arm throbbed, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on the task. The box's lock was intricate, requiring a key they didn't have, so they turned to the archive for answers. They sifted through yellowed letters and ledgers, uncovering fragments of St. Bridget's history. A record from 1943 described a ritual performed by Sister Agnes and her followers, binding a darkness to the convent in exchange for protection during the war. The cost was a blood sacrifice, renewed every 40 years. Clara's heart sank as she read the names of the nuns involved. One was Sister Eleanor, her mother's name. The photograph in her prayer book flashed in her mind, undeniable proof of her mother's connection. Daniel found a sketch of the box, labeled Arca Sanguinis, the blood chest. It was said to contain a relic of the vow, a shard of bone sealed with the blood of the first sacrifice. "If we open it," Daniel said, "we might break the vow, or unleash something worse." Clara's resolve wavered, but the memory of Evelyn's vacant eyes and Ruth's clawed face steeled her. "We have to try," she said. "For them." As they searched for a key, the archive grew colder, the shadows lengthening. Clara's lantern dimmed, and a whisper slithered through the room, her name spoken in her mother's voice. She spun, heart pounding, and saw a figure in the corner, a woman in a nun's habit, her face obscured. "Clara," it whispered, "leave the box." Daniel grabbed her, pulling her back as the figure vanished, leaving only a faint scent of blood. The archive's door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Clara clutched the box, her mother's warning echoing, "The vow is a lie." The locked door rattled, and Clara and Daniel braced for the wraith, but it was Beatrice who entered, her medallion glinting like a blade. Her face was a mask of fury, her voice cold. "You've gone too far, Sister Clara. The box belongs to the convent, to God." Clara stood her ground, the box heavy in her hands. "God doesn't demand blood," she said. "What are you hiding?" Beatrice's eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, her presence suffocating. Daniel moved between them, his pistol raised. "Back off, Mother Superior," he said. "We know about the vow, the sacrifices. It ends now." Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you can defy what's been written in blood? The wraith will claim you all." Clara's anger flared. She held up the box, her voice steady. "This is the key, isn't it? To whatever you've done to Evelyn, to this place." Beatrice's composure cracked, and for a moment, fear flickered in her eyes. She lunged for the box, but Daniel restrained her, pinning her arms. "Tell us the truth," he growled. "Or we open it right now." Beatrice's voice dropped to a hiss. "Evelyn is the vessel, born to renew the vow. Without her, the wraith will consume us all." Clara's blood ran cold. Evelyn, a sacrifice? She thought of the girl's frail form, her whispered warnings. Beatrice broke free, shoving Daniel aside, and fled into the corridor, her footsteps fading into the mist. Clara and Daniel stood in the archive, the box between them, its hum louder now, almost a heartbeat. "We can't trust her," Clara said, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "But we need to protect Evelyn." Daniel nodded, his hand brushing hers, a fleeting touch that grounded her. "We'll find a way," he said. "Together." As they left the archive, the convent seemed to groan, its walls trembling. In the distance, Evelyn's voice rose in a chilling chant, and the wraith's shadow flickered across the stained glass windows. Act 1 ended with Clara and Daniel united, the box in their possession, and a dark truth looming: the vow was a chain, and breaking it might cost everything. The blood chest sat heavy in Clara Kane's hands, its cold metal surface seeming to pulse with a life of its own. She and Father Daniel Shea had retreated to the convent's old sacristy, a cramped room behind the chapel where vestments hung like ghosts in the dim lantern light. The events of the night, Beatrice's chilling revelation about Evelyn as the vow's vessel, the wraith's relentless pursuit, had left Clara's nerves frayed. Her arm, still bandaged from the wraith's claws, throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the dread gnawing at her heart. The chest, with its locked secrets, was their only hope to save Evelyn and break the vow that bound St. Bridget's to a demonic force. Daniel knelt beside her, his rugged face etched with exhaustion and resolve. His pistol lay on the table, a stark reminder of his unorthodox priesthood. "We need to open it," he said, his voice low, "but we're flying blind. If Beatrice is right, this could unleash hell." Clara met his gaze, her hazel eyes steady despite the fear. And if we do nothing, Evelyn dies. I won't let that happen." Her words carried the weight of her own past, her mother's mysterious connection to this place, the blood-stained flower in her prayer book, the haunting note, "The vow is a lie." They examined the chest's lock, intricate and ancient, requiring a key they didn't have. Clara traced the engraved symbol, a circle split by a jagged line, feeling a chill as her fingers brushed it. Daniel pulled a small knife from his jacket, attempting to pry the lock, but the chest resisted, its hum growing louder, almost a growl. The air in the sacristy thickened, and a lantern flickered. Clara's breath caught as a whisper slithered through the room, not the wraith's voice, but her mother's. "Clara, beware the blood." She spun, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Daniel grabbed her hand, grounding her. "Stay with me," he said, his touch warm, forbidden. Clara pulled away, her vows warring with the pull she felt toward him. They couldn't afford distractions, not now. Instead, she focused on a memory. Seamus, the groundskeeper, had mentioned a key hidden in the convent's past, tied to Sister Agnes's ritual. "We need to go back to the archive," Clara said. "There's more to find." As they left the sacristy, the chest tucked under Daniel's arm, the convent's walls seemed to groan, and in the distance, Evelyn's faint chant echoed, a reminder of the ticking clock. The archive's dust-choked air enveloped Clara and Daniel as they returned to its shadowed shelves, the blood chest a heavy burden between them. Clara's lantern cast flickering light on crumbling ledges, but her mind was elsewhere, drawn to the past. As she reached for a journal marked 1943, the room blurred, and she found herself no longer in the archive but in the convent's crypt, decades earlier. The vision was vivid, as if the wraith itself had pulled her into history. It was 1943, and the crypt glowed with torchlight, its stone altar stained with fresh blood. Sister Agnes, a severe woman with eyes like coal, stood at the center, flanked by 5 nuns, including a young Sister Eleanor, Clara's mother, her face pale but resolute. The air was thick with incense and fear, the war's distant rumble shaking the earth. Orphans huddled in the shadows, their eyes wide, as Agnes raised a dagger over a crude pentagram carved into the floor. "The darkness comes," she intoned. "Only blood can bind it." Eleanor hesitated, her hand trembling as she held a chalice. "This is blasphemy," she whispered, but Agnes's glare silenced her. The other nuns chanted, their voices rising in a haunting cadence, and the pentagram glowed, summoning a shadow that coalesced into the wraith, a cloaked figure with a veiled, eyeless face. Its voice was a chorus of anguish. "Give me a soul, and I spare your flock." Agnes nodded, and a young girl, no older than Evelyn, was dragged forward, her screams muffled. Eleanor lunged to stop it, but the nuns restrained her, and Agnes slit the girl's throat, her blood pooling in the pentagram. The wraith laughed, its form solidifying, and the crypt shook as the vow was sealed. Eleanor fell to her knees, sobbing, her habit stained with the girl's blood. Agnes placed a bone shard from the sacrifice into a metal chest, the blood chest, locking it with a key she wore around her neck. "Every 40 years," she said, "the vow must be renewed, or the wraith takes us all." The vision faded, and Clara gasped, back in the archive, her hands clutching the journal. Daniel caught her as she swayed, his face taut with concern. "What did you see?" he asked. Clara recounted the ritual, her voice shaking. "My mother tried to stop it," she said. "She was part of this horror." The journal confirmed the vision, detailing the 1943 pact and naming Eleanor as a dissenter who fled the convent, pregnant with Clara. The key to the chest, it noted, was hidden in the chapel's reliquary. As they absorbed this, the archive's shelves rattled, and the wraith's whisper echoed, "Blood calls to blood." Clara and Daniel moved swiftly to the chapel, the blood chest a dangerous weight in their hands. The vision of 1943 had shaken Clara, confirming her mother's role in the vow and her own tangled connection to St. Bridget's. The chapel was silent, its stained glass windows dark, but the air felt charged, as if the wraith were watching. Clara's heart raced as they approached the reliquary, a gilded cabinet behind the altar, its doors etched with saints and thorns. Daniel forced the lock, revealing a collection of relics, bones, vials, and a small silver key, its head shaped like the vow symbol. Clara reached for it, but the reliquary's doors slammed shut, trapping her hand. Pain shot through her, and the chapel's candles flared, casting shadows that twisted into clawed shapes. Daniel pried the doors open, freeing her, but the key fell to the floor, and the wraith materialized, its form more solid, its veil now a shroud of ash. "You cannot undo the pact," it hissed, its voice a storm. The chapel's pew splintered, and the air grew suffocating. Clara grabbed the key, her wounded hand bleeding onto it, and the wraith shrieked, recoiling as if burned. Daniel fired his pistol, the shots useless, and pulled Clara toward the door. The wraith's claws slashed at them, tearing Daniel's jacket and grazing his shoulder. They stumbled into the cloister, the key clutched in Clara's hand, the wraith's screams fading behind them. In the moonlight, Clara examined the key, its silver stained with her blood. "It reacted to me," she said, her voice trembling. "My mother's blood, my blood, it's tied to the vow." Daniel bandaged his shoulder, his eyes dark with pain and something deeper, fear for her. "Then you're in more danger than we thought," he said. Their hands brushed as he tied the bandage, and Clara felt the forbidden pull again, her heart betraying her vows. She stepped back, focusing on the key. "We open the chest tonight," she said. "No more waiting." As they headed to the sacristy, they heard Evelyn's voice, not chanting but singing, a haunting lullaby that echoed through the convent. Clara's stomach twisted. The girl was in the dormitory, and something was terribly wrong. The dormitory was a maze of narrow beds, shrouded in darkness save for the faint glow of a single candle. Clara and Daniel found Evelyn standing on her cot, her nightgown ghostly white, her voice weaving a melody that was both beautiful and wrong, its notes twisting into dissonance. Her eyes were rolled back, her hands outstretched, and the air around her shimmered, as if reality were fraying. Sister Ruth, still bandaged from her earlier attack, stood frozen nearby, tears streaming down her face. "Evelyn, stop," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. She approached, the blood chest and key in her hands, but Evelyn's song grew louder, and the dormitory's walls bled, dark liquid seeping from the stone. Ruth screamed, collapsing, and Daniel caught her, his face pale. "It's the wraith," he said. "It's using her." Clara's heart ached for Evelyn, a child caught in a demonic web, and she remembered her mother's failure to save the girl in 1943. She wouldn't fail now. Clara set the chest on the floor and inserted the key, her hands shaking. The lock clicked, and the chest's hum became a roar, shaking the room. Evelyn's song faltered, and her eyes snapped to Clara, clear for the first time. "Help me," she whispered, her voice her own. But before Clara could open the chest, the wraith appeared, its form towering, its claws dripping with shadow. "The vessel is mine," it roared, lunging for Evelyn. Daniel tackled Clara out of the way, and the wraith's claws raked the floor, splintering wood. Clara scrambled to her feet, the key still in her hand, and grabbed Evelyn, pulling her behind a bed. Daniel fired at the wraith, buying time, but the creature was relentless, its form shifting between man and beast. Clara's eyes met Daniel's, a silent vow passing between them: protect the girl, no matter the cost. As the wraith closed in, Clara realized the chest was their only weapon, but opening it might doom them all. The dormitory shook, and Evelyn's hand tightened in hers, a small, desperate anchor in the storm. The dormitory trembled as the wraith's claws tore through the air, its shadowy form looming over Clara and Evelyn. Clara clutched the blood chest and its silver key, her heart pounding as she shielded the trembling girl behind a splintered bed. Daniel stood between them and the wraith, his pistol raised, but his bullets only sparked uselessly against the creature's shifting mass. The walls of St. Bridget's convent bled black, and Sister Ruth's sobs mingled with Evelyn's faint whimpers, a chorus of despair in the suffocating darkness. Clara's eyes locked on the chest, its hum now a deafening pulse that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. "We have to open it," she shouted to Daniel over the wraith's unearthly roar. "It's our only chance." Daniel nodded, his face grim, and fired another shot to keep the wraith at bay. Clara knelt, her wounded hand shaking as she inserted the key into the chest's lock. The click was thunderous, drowning out the chaos, and the lid creaked open, releasing a gust of frigid air that smelled of iron and decay. Inside lay a shard of bone, yellowed and etched with runes, nestled in a pool of congealed blood that pulsed like a living thing. Clara recoiled, but the wraith shrieked, its form flickering as if in pain. The bone glowed faintly, and a voice, not the wraith's, but a woman's, soft and anguished, whispered from the chest, "Break the chain, child." Clara recognized it instantly, her mother, Eleanor. Tears stung her eyes as she reached for the bone, but the wraith lunged, its claws grazing her arm, drawing fresh blood. Daniel tackled the creature, his body slamming into the bed frame, and shouted, "Clara, do it." She grabbed the bone, its surface burning her skin, and held it aloft. The wraith writhed, its veil disintegrating, revealing a face of raw, pulsating flesh. The dormitory's walls cracked, and Evelyn screamed, her small hands clutching Clara's habit. The bone's glow intensified, and Clara felt a surge of power, as if her mother's spirit were guiding her. She smashed the bone against the floor, and it shattered, the blood in the chest evaporating in a hiss of steam. The wraith howled, its form collapsing into a swirling vortex of shadow, then vanished. The dormitory fell silent, the bleeding walls now dry. Clara collapsed, gasping, the key still in her hand. Daniel crawled to her side, his shoulder bleeding, his eyes wide with relief and fear. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Clara shook her head, the weight of her mother's voice lingering. "No," she whispered. "We've only weakened it." Evelyn clung to her, silent but awake, and Clara knew the girl was still in danger. The chest, now empty, felt heavier than ever. Clara's hands trembled as she and Daniel carried Evelyn back to the sacristy, the empty blood chest tucked under Daniel's arm. The convent felt different now, its shadows deeper, its silence predatory. Clara's mind churned with the vision of her mother's voice, and as she sat beside Evelyn, who now slept fitfully, another vision pulled her under, dragging her back to 1943. The crypt was alive with torchlight, the air thick with the stench of blood and fear. Sister Eleanor, Clara's mother, stood apart from the other nuns, her young face a mask of defiance. Sister Agnes, the pact's architect, held the blood chest, its freshly sealed bone shard glinting in the firelight. The body of the sacrificed girl lay at the altar, her blood still warm, and the wraith loomed over the scene, its eyeless gaze fixed on Eleanor. The other nuns, Sister Margaret, Sister Teresa, and 2 others, knelt, their chants faltering as Eleanor stepped forward. "This is wrong," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm. "We've damned ourselves, not saved the convent." Agnes's eyes blazed, and she raised the dagger, still slick with blood. "You swore an oath," she hissed. "To protect the orphans, to bind the darkness." Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Not like this. Not with murder." The wraith laughed, its voice a grinding stone. "Her soul is weak," it said. "She will break." Eleanor lunged for the chest, trying to wrest it from Agnes, but the other nuns restrained her, their hands like iron. Agnes struck her across the face, and Eleanor fell, her habit tearing. "You'll bear the mark of this night," Agnes said, carving a shallow cut on Eleanor's arm, the same spot where Clara now bore her own wound. The wraith fed on Eleanor's pain, its form growing stronger, and Agnes locked the chest, hanging the key around her neck. "You'll serve the vow, or you'll die," she warned. Eleanor fled the crypt, her sobs echoing, and the vision shifted to a later moment, Eleanor, pregnant, standing in the convent cemetery under a storm-swept sky. She buried a small bundle, a pressed flower stained with her blood, beneath a gravestone, whispering, "Forgive me, child. I'll keep you free." The vision snapped back, and Clara gasped, tears streaming down her face. She was back in the sacristy, Daniel's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent. "Clara, what did you see?" She told him of Eleanor's defiance, her attempt to stop the pact, and the flower buried in the cemetery. "She was pregnant with me," Clara said, her voice breaking. "She left to protect me from the vow." Daniel's eyes softened, and he pulled her close, a fleeting embrace that broke every rule but felt like salvation. "We'll finish what she started," he promised. But as they planned to search the cemetery, the sacristy's door creaked open, revealing Seamus, his face grim. "Beatrice is coming," he warned. "And she's not alone." The convent cemetery was a tangle of crooked crosses and fog, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Clara and Daniel, with Evelyn in tow, followed Seamus through the mist, the empty blood chest hidden under Clara's cloak. The groundskeeper's warning about Beatrice had set them on edge, and Clara's vision of her mother's buried flower drove her forward. The gravestone Eleanor had chosen, Seamus said, was unmarked, hidden near the crypt's entrance, a place no nun dared visit. Evelyn clung to Clara's hand, her silence unnerving. The girl's eyes darted to the shadows, as if seeing things Clara couldn't. Daniel walked ahead, his pistol ready, his shoulder still bleeding through its bandage. "Stay close," he whispered, his breath visible in the chill air. Clara's heart ached at the sight of him, her feelings a dangerous current she couldn't quell. She focused on the task, scanning the graves for an unmarked stone. Seamus stopped at a low, weathered slab, its surface cracked but bare of inscription. "Here," he said, his voice low. "Dig." Daniel and Clara knelt, using their hands to claw at the damp earth, while Seamus kept watch. The soil was cold, unyielding, but Clara's fingers soon brushed something soft, a cloth bundle, stained and brittle. She pulled it free, revealing a pressed flower, its petals dark with dried blood, and a folded note in Eleanor's handwriting. The vow feeds on innocence. Destroy the chest, or the wraith claims all. Clara's breath caught, the note confirming her mother's warning. But before she could show Daniel, the ground trembled, and a low growl rose from the crypt's entrance nearby. The fog thickened, and the wraith's voice echoed, not from one direction but all around. You cannot hide her, it hissed, its words aimed at Evelyn. The girl screamed, collapsing, her body convulsing as if possessed. Clara dropped the note, grabbing Evelyn, while Daniel aimed his pistol into the fog. Figures emerged, nuns, their faces pale and eyes hollow, moving with unnatural grace. Beatrice's guard, Seamus muttered, drawing a knife. The nuns attacked, their movements jerky, as if puppeted by the wraith. Daniel fired, dropping one, but another tackled him, her nails raking his arm. Clara shielded Evelyn, whispering prayers, as Seamus fought off a third. The wraith's laughter filled the air, and Clara realized they were surrounded, the cemetery a trap. With no choice, they fled toward the crypt's entrance, the only path left open. The crypt's stone staircase swallowed Clara, Daniel, Evelyn, and Seamus as they fled the possessed nuns, the wraith's laughter chasing them into the dark. Clara carried Evelyn, the girl's convulsions subsiding but her body limp, while Daniel clutched the blood chest, his face blooded from the fight. Seamus led the way, his knife glinting in the lantern's weak light, his knowledge of the crypt their only guide. The air was thick with decay, and the carvings on the walls, anguished faces from Clara's earlier vision, seemed to scream in silence. At the crypt's heart, the circular altar from 1943 loomed, its pentagram still stained with blood. Clara set Evelyn down, her heart racing as she realized the crypt was no sanctuary but a battlefield. We're trapped, she whispered, the wraith's presence pressing against her like a physical weight. Daniel placed the chest on the altar, his eyes scanning the shadows. Maybe we can use it, he said. The wraith feared it when you broke the bone. Before Clara could respond, the crypt's entrance sealed with a grinding thud, and the possessed nuns descended the stairs, their movements synchronized, their voices chanting in Latin. Seamus barred the way, his knife flashing, but the nuns overwhelmed him, their claws tearing into his flesh. Go, he shouted, blood streaming down his face. Clara hesitated, but Daniel pulled her back, his hand tight around hers. He's buying us time, he said, his voice raw. Clara knelt by Evelyn, who stirred, her eyes clearing. It's in me, the girl whispered, her voice trembling. It wants me. Clara's throat tightened, the weight of her mother's failure heavy on her shoulders. She opened the note again, reading aloud, destroy the chest. We end this now, she said, grabbing a loose stone from the altar. She raised it to smash the chest, but the wraith materialized, its form now a towering mass of shadow and bone, its claws dripping blood. You defy the eternal, it roared, and the crypt shook, stones falling from the ceiling. Daniel shoved Clara aside as a claw slashed at her, taking the blow himself. He fell, blood pooling beneath him, and Clara screamed, her resolve fracturing. Evelyn's hand found hers, and the girl's voice was steady. Do it, Clara. With a cry, Clara brought the stone down, cracking the chest's lid, and the wraith howled, its form unraveling. But the crypt continued to collapse, and Clara realized their fight was far from over. The crypt of St. Bridget's convent groaned like a dying beast, its stone walls splintering as Clara Kane clutched the cracked blood chest, its jagged edges cutting into her palms. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the stench of decay and blood. Evelyn, the frail 7-year-old vessel of the vow, clung to Clara's side, her eyes wide with terror but resolute. Daniel Shea, blood streaming from a gash on his chest, staggered to his feet, his pistol lost in the chaos. The wraith's howl lingered, its foam temporarily dispersed by the chest's destruction, but Clara knew it wasn't gone, just biding its time. "We have to move," Daniel shouted, his voice raw over the crypt's rumbling. Clara nodded, her heart twisting at the sight of Seamus's body, torn apart by the possessed nuns. His sacrifice had given them a chance, and she wouldn't waste it. She hoisted Evelyn onto her shoulder, the girl's weight a stark reminder of her vulnerability, and grabbed the chest, its broken lid dangling. Daniel led the way, kicking aside rubble to clear a path to the sealed entrance. The possessed nuns, their bodies twisted and eyes glowing with the wraith's malice, blocked the stairs, their chants a low, guttural drone. Clara's breath hitched, but Daniel, despite his wounds, charged, using a broken stone as a weapon. He smashed it against one nun's skull, her body crumpling, and Clara followed, shielding Evelyn as they pushed through. The nuns clawed at them, tearing Clara's habit and grazing Daniel's arm, but their movements were sluggish, as if the wraith's hold had weakened. At the entrance, Daniel heaved against the stone slab, his muscles straining. Clara set Evelyn down and helped, her wounded hand screaming in pain. The slab budged, revealing a sliver of moonlight, and they squeezed through, collapsing in the fog-shrouded cemetery. The crypt's collapse sealed the nuns inside, their chants fading into silence. Clara gasped, her lungs burning, and checked Evelyn, who was shivering but unharmed. Daniel's face was pale, his breathing labored, but his eyes met Clara's, a silent vow to keep going. "We hurt it," Clara said, holding the chest's remains. "But it's not over. Evelyn's still tied to it." Daniel nodded, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind his chest wound. Their hands brushed, and Clara felt the forbidden spark again, her heart betraying her vows. She pulled away, focusing on Evelyn. "We need to find Beatrice," she said. "She knows how to end this." But as they stood, the fog parted, revealing Mother Superior Beatrice, her medallion glinting, flanked by 2 more possessed nuns. Her voice was cold. "You've doomed us all, Sister Clara." The cemetery's mist swirled around Beatrice, her stern face illuminated by the faint glow of her medallion, its symbol matching the blood chests. Clara tightened her grip on Evelyn, the cracked chest heavy in her other hand, while Daniel stepped forward, his body tense despite his wounds. The 2 possessed nuns at Beatrice's side moved like marionettes, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, their fingers twitching with latent violence. Clara's stomach churned. She had trusted Beatrice, believed her piety, but now saw only calculation in her eyes. "You broke the sacred relic," Beatrice said, her voice a blade. "The wraith will not forgive this. Evelyn must be offered, or the convent falls." Clara's blood boiled, the memory of her mother's defiance in 1943 fueling her. "You're the one feeding this demon," she spat. "My mother tried to stop it, and you punished her for it." Beatrice's lips curled, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Eleanor was a fool," she said. "Her rebellion birthed you, a cursed child, marked for the vow." Clara's heart stuttered. "Marked?" She remembered the scar on her arm, mirroring her mother's, and the wraith's reaction to her blood. Daniel's hand grazed her back, steadying her, his presence a quiet strength. "Enough games," he growled at Beatrice. "Tell us how to break the vow, or we take our chances with the wraith." Beatrice laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "The vow is eternal. Only blood renews it, Evelyn's blood, or yours, Clara." Before Clara could respond, the possessed nuns lunged, their claws slashing through the fog. Daniel tackled one, wrestling her to the ground, while Clara pushed Evelyn behind a gravestone and faced the other. The nun's strength was unnatural, her nails raking Clara's shoulder, but Clara swung the chest, its broken edge cracking the nun's jaw. The creature staggered, and Clara kicked her into a grave, where she lay still. Daniel subdued the other, his breath ragged, but Beatrice was gone, her medallion glinting in the distance as she fled toward the convent. Clara helped Daniel stand, their eyes locking for a moment too long, the unspoken pull between them undeniable. Evelyn's small voice broke the silence. "She's lying," the girl whispered, her eyes clear. "The wraith fears you, Clara. I saw it." Clara knelt, her heart aching for the child's burden. "We'll protect you," she promised, though doubt gnawed at her. They followed Beatrice's trail, the chest's weight a reminder of their fragile victory. As they neared the convent, a scream, "Ruth's," pierced the night, and Clara realized the wraith was far from finished. Clara's vision blurred as they entered the convent's cloister, the scream still ringing in her ears. The cracked blood chest seemed to pulse, and the world shifted, pulling her back to 1943. She was Eleanor again, fleeing the crypt after the horrific ritual, her habit torn, her arm bleeding from Agnes's cut. The convent was a labyrinth of shadows, its corridors alive with the wraith's whispers, mocking her failure to save the sacrificed girl. Eleanor stumbled into the chapel, collapsing before the altar, her sobs echoing. "Forgive me," she prayed, but the crucifix above seemed to stare in judgment. Footsteps approached, Sister Margaret, one of the nuns from the ritual, her face pale with guilt. "You were right," Margaret whispered. "This pact is damnation. We must undo it." Eleanor's eyes widened, hope flickering. Margaret revealed a secret: the blood chest's bone could be destroyed with a blessed relic, a dagger hidden in the convent's catacombs, but only if the vow's vessel, a child born of the convent, was spared. They planned to steal the chest, but Agnes appeared, her dagger gleaming. "Traitors," she hissed, lunging at Margaret. Eleanor pushed Margaret aside, taking the blow, a shallow cut across her ribs. She fought back, grabbing a candelabrum and striking Agnes, who fell, dazed. Margaret helped Eleanor flee, guiding her to the cemetery, where they buried the blood-stained flower as a marker for the future. "Your child will carry this fight," Margaret said, pressing a prayer book into Eleanor's hands. "Keep her free." Eleanor escaped under cover of night, the wraith's laughter chasing her. The vision snapped back, and Clara gasped, back in the cloister, Daniel and Evelyn at her side. She clutched her mother's prayer book, its weight grounding her. "There's a dagger," she told Daniel, her voice urgent. "In the catacombs. It can destroy the chest." Daniel's eyes lit with hope, but his face was pale, his wounds slowing him. "Then we find it," he said, his hand brushing hers, touch that lingered. Ruth's scream came again, from the infirmary. Clara's heart sank, her friend was in danger, and Beatrice was likely behind it. They moved toward the sound, Evelyn's hand tight in Clara's, the cracked chest a dangerous burden. The convent walls seemed to pulse, and Clara felt the wraith's presence, weakened but growing, waiting for its moment to strike. The infirmary was a scene of chaos, its cots overturned, its walls smeared with dark, glistening stains. Sister Ruth stood in the center, her bandages torn, her eyes wild and unseeing. She clutched a scalpel, its blade dripping blood, and the floor around her was littered with broken glass and torn linens. Clara's heart stopped. Ruth, her gentle friend, was gone, her mind shattered by the wraith's touch. Evelyn whimpered, hiding behind Clara, while Daniel raised his hands, his voice calm but tense. "Ruth, it's us. Put the scalpel down." Ruth's head snapped toward them, her voice a guttural rasp. "The vow sees all," she said, the words not her own. Her face contorted, and she slashed at the air, as if fighting an unseen enemy. Clara stepped forward, the cracked chest heavy in her arms, her mother's prayer book tucked inside her habit. "Ruth, fight it," she pleaded. "You're stronger than this." But Ruth's eyes glowed with the wraith's malice, and she lunged, the scalpel aimed at Evelyn. Daniel tackled Ruth, pinning her arms, but she thrashed with unnatural strength, her nails clawing his face. Clara set the chest down and grabbed Evelyn, pulling her to safety. "Stay here," she told the girl, then rushed to help Daniel. Ruth's screams filled the room, a mix of her own voice and the wraith's, and Clara saw a shadow flicker behind her friend, a glimpse of the wraith, its form coalescing. "It's controlling her!" Clara shouted, grabbing a vial of holy water from a nearby table. She splashed the water on Ruth, who screamed, her body convulsing. The wraith's shadow recoiled, and Ruth's eyes cleared for a moment, tears streaming down her face. "Clara, it's in my head," she sobbed. "Kill me, please." Clara's heart shattered, but she shook her head, refusing to give up. She held Ruth's face, whispering prayers, while Daniel restrained her. The wraith's shadow lunged again, but the holy water's effect lingered, and it retreated, its laughter echoing. Ruth collapsed, unconscious but alive, and Clara bound her hands with a torn sheet, tears blurring her vision. Daniel touched her shoulder, his own face blooded, his eyes filled with shared pain. "We can't save everyone," he said softly, but Clara shook her head. "We have to try." They lifted Ruth to a cot, securing her, and Clara picked up the chest, its cracks a reminder of their fragile progress. Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "The catacombs," she whispered. "It's waiting there." Clara nodded, knowing the dagger was their last hope, but the wraith's growing power loomed over them like a storm. The air in St. Bridget's convent was thick with dread as Clara Kane led Daniel Shea and Evelyn through the cloister, the cracked blood chest clutched to her chest like a cursed relic. Ruth's possession and Beatrice's betrayal had left Clara shaken, but Evelyn's whispered warning about the catacombs burned in her mind. The blessed dagger, hidden there since 1943, was their only hope to destroy the chest and break the vow binding the wraith to the convent. Daniel, his face bloodied and chest wound seeping through his makeshift bandage, walked beside her, his eyes scanning the shadows. Evelyn's small hand trembled in Clara's, her silence heavier than ever. The catacombs entrance lay beneath the chapel, hidden behind a rusted grate Seamus had once warned Clara to avoid. Daniel pried it open, the screech of metal echoing in the silent convent. The stairs descended into a blackness that seemed to swallow their lantern's light, the air damp and laced with the scent of mold and something sharper, blood. Clara's heart pounded, the memory of her mother's 1943 vision guiding her. Eleanor had known about the dagger, had buried a clue to protect her unborn child. Clara would not fail her now. The catacombs were a labyrinth of narrow tunnels, their walls carved with faded crosses and skeletal remains embedded in the stone. Daniel led, his pistol drawn, though he knew it was useless against the wraith. Evelyn's breathing was shallow, her eyes darting to the darkness, as if sensing the entity's presence. Clara whispered prayers, her mother's prayer book tucked inside her habit, its blood-stained flower a talisman. The chest's crack seemed to widen, its hum a low, menacing pulse that vibrated through her bones. They reached a chamber dominated by a stone sarcophagus, its lid engraved with the vow symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. Clara's breath caught. This was the place from her vision. Daniel pushed the lid aside, revealing a hollow space containing a velvet pouch. Inside was the dagger, its blade silver and etched with Latin, in nomine Dei, framed vinculum, in God's name, break the chain. Clara lifted it, its weight reassuring, but the chamber shook, and the wraith's voice roared, "You cannot sever what is eternal." The walls bled, dark liquid pooling at their feet, and skeletal hands burst from the stone, clawing at Clara's legs. Daniel fired at the shadows, his bullet sparking, while Evelyn screamed, her voice echoing unnaturally. Clara swung the dagger, slicing through the hands, which dissolved into ash. The wraith materialized, its form a towering mass of shadow and bone, its eyeless face fixed on Evelyn. "The vessel is mine," it hissed, lunging. Clara thrust the dagger forward, grazing the wraith, which recoiled, its scream shaking the catacombs. They fled deeper into the tunnels, the dagger and chest their only weapons, but the wraith's pursuit was relentless. The catacombs' tunnels twisted like veins, their darkness pressing against Clara, Daniel, and Evelyn as they ran, the wraith's screams echoing behind them. Clara's arm burned where the skeletal hands had clawed her, but she gripped the blessed dagger tightly, its silver blade glinting in the lantern's faltering light. Daniel carried the cracked blood chest, his wounds slowing him, his face pale but determined. Evelyn stumbled, her small frame trembling, and Clara lifted her, the girl's weight a reminder of the vow's cruel price. The wraith's presence was a physical weight, its malice seeping into their minds. They reached a dead end, a circular chamber with a sunken floor, its center marked by a faded pentagram, the site of another ritual. Clara set Evelyn down, her heart racing as she realized the wraith had driven them here deliberately. The air grew frigid, and the lantern extinguished, plunging them into darkness. Daniel's hand found Clara's, his touch a fleeting anchor, but before they could plan, the wraith's voice filled the chamber, not with words but with a vision, pulling them into its memory. Clara found herself in 1943, standing in this same chamber, but it was alive with torchlight and terror. Sister Agnes knelt at the pentagram, her hands stained with blood, the blood chest open before her. The sacrificed girl's body lay nearby, her eyes still open, and the wraith loomed, its form less defined, feeding on the nun's fear. But this vision showed more. Agnes had not acted alone. A shadowy figure, cloaked and faceless, stood behind her, whispering commands. "The vow must hold," it said, its voice a serpent's hiss. "The convent is the gate, and the child is the key." Eleanor, Clara's mother, was there, chained to the wall, her face bruised from her defiance. She screamed as Agnes carved the vow symbol into the girl's flesh, sealing the pact. The shadowy figure laughed, revealing itself as the true master of the wraith, a demon older than the convent, using the nuns to anchor its power. Eleanor broke free, grabbing the dagger from a nearby table, and stabbed at the figure, but it vanished, leaving the wraith to attack. Agnes locked the chest, and the vision shattered, returning Clara to the present. Clara gasped, the dagger still in her hand, Daniel and Evelyn beside her. "It's not just the wraith," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something worse, something controlling it." Daniel's eyes widened, his Catholic training warring with the horror. "A demon," he said, his voice grim. "And Evelyn's the key to its gate." The girl whimpered, and Clara held her close, the dagger's weight a promise. They had to destroy the chest, but the wraith reappeared, its form now laced with fire, its claws slashing. Daniel shoved Clara and Evelyn behind the pentagram, taking a blow that tore his side. Clara screamed, the dagger raised, as the chamber's walls began to collapse. The catacombs chamber shuddered, stones falling as the wraith's fiery claws slashed through the air, its form a nightmare of shadow and flame. Clara stood over Evelyn, the blessed dagger gleaming in her hand, the cracked blood chest at her feet. Daniel lay crumpled against the pentagram, blood pooling beneath him, his breath shallow but his eyes fixed on Clara, urging her to fight. The wraith's voice was a storm, its words aimed at Evelyn. "You are mine, vessel," it roared, its claws reaching for the girl. Clara's heart pounded, the vision of the demon behind the wraith searing her mind. This was no mere spirit, it was a gatekeeper, and Evelyn was its lock. Clara thrust the dagger into the chest, its blade sinking into the cracked metal. The wraith screamed, its form convulsing, and the pentagram glowed, burning Clara's feet. Evelyn cried out, her body arching as if pulled by an unseen force, and Clara realized the vow's power was tied to her blood, too. "Stay with me, Evelyn," she shouted, pulling the girl close. The dagger's Latin inscription, "In nomine Dei, Frange Vinculum," echoed in her mind, and she prayed, her voice rising over the chaos, calling on God's strength. The wraith lunged, but Daniel staggered to his feet, grabbing a fallen stone and hurling it, distracting the creature. His sacrifice gave Clara time, and she drove the dagger deeper, splitting the chest in two. A blast of light erupted, and the wraith's form shattered, its fragments dissolving into ash. The chamber's collapse slowed, but Evelyn convulsed, her eyes rolling back, a dark mist seeping from her mouth. Clara held her, tears streaming down her face, and pressed the dagger to the girl's chest, not to harm, but to bless. "In God's name, be free," she whispered. The mist dispersed, and Evelyn gasped, her eyes clearing. The wraith was gone, but Clara felt its master, the demon from the vision, still watching, its presence a distant thunder. Daniel collapsed, his wounds critical, and Clara rushed to him, cradling his head. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking. His hand found hers, weak but warm, and he smiled faintly. "You're stronger than it," he said, his voice fading. Clara's heart tore, her love for him a sin she couldn't deny, but she kissed his forehead, a silent vow to save him. They carried Daniel and Evelyn out of the catacombs, the dagger and chest's remains in Clara's hands. The convent was silent, but Beatrice's absence loomed, and Clara knew the demon's gate was still open. Act 2 ended with Evelyn safe but marked, Daniel on the brink of death, and Clara facing a truth, her blood, tied to Eleanor's, was the vow's final key. The battle was far from over, and the cost would be higher than she feared. The fog clung to St. Bridget's convent like a mourner's veil, its spires piercing the dawn as Clara Kane stumbled from the catacombs, Evelyn's small hand in hers. The blessed dagger, still warm from its clash with the wraith, hung heavy in Clara's torn habit, alongside the shattered remains of the blood chest. Daniel Shea, barely conscious, leaned on her shoulder, his blood soaking her sleeve, his breath a ragged whisper. The wraith was gone, for now, but the demon it served, the shadowy force from Clara's vision, lingered in the air, a malevolent pulse that made the convent stones hum with dread. Clara's heart ached as she lowered Daniel onto a pew in the chapel, his face ashen, his eyes fluttering. Evelyn knelt beside him, her frail frame trembling but her gaze steady, as if the child understood the cost of their victory. "He's dying," Evelyn whispered, her voice cutting through Clara's haze of exhaustion. Clara tore strips from her habit, binding Daniel's wounds, but the blood kept coming, staining her hands like a sacrament gone wrong. "Stay with me, Daniel," she murmured, her voice breaking. His hand grazed hers, weak but deliberate, and his lips curved in a faint smile. "You're worth it," he rasped, his words a confession that tore at her vows. The chapel's silence was shattered by footsteps. Sister Ruth, her bandages fresh but her eyes hollow, staggered in, freed from the wraith's grip but marked by its torment. "Beatrice is gone," Ruth said, her voice trembling. "The nuns are whispering, she's preparing something in the crypt." Clara's blood ran cold. Beatrice, the Mother Superior who had betrayed them, was the key to the demon's plan, and Evelyn was still its target. Clara's mother, Eleanor, had warned in her note, "The vow feeds on innocence." Evelyn's survival was a defiance of that vow, and Clara knew the demon would stop at nothing to claim her. Clara stood, the dagger's weight grounding her. "We need to find Beatrice," she said, her resolve hardening. Ruth offered to watch Daniel, her hands shaking but determined, and Clara nodded, trusting her friend despite the scars they both bore. She took Evelyn's hand, the girl's silence a heavy burden, and headed for the crypt's entrance, the dagger and chest fragments her only weapons. As they left, Daniel's voice, faint but fierce, followed her. "Come back to me, Clara." Her heart twisted, the forbidden love she felt for him a sin she could no longer deny, but she pushed forward, knowing the demon waited below. The crypt's entrance loomed like a gaping wound, its darkness swallowing Clara and Evelyn as they descended, the air thick with the stench of blood and ash. Clara's lantern flickered, casting shadows that seemed to writhe, and the dagger in her hand pulsed, as if sensing the demon's presence. Evelyn's small fingers tightened around Clara's, her eyes darting to the walls, where the vow symbol, circle and jagged line, glowed faintly. Clara's mind churned, the weight of her mother's legacy pressing against her, and as they reached the crypt's heart, a vision seized her, pulling her back to 1943. The crypt was alight with torches, the pentagram on the altar slick with blood. Sister Agnes stood at its center, her face a mask of zeal, the blood chest open before her. The sacrificed girl's body lay still, but the air thrummed with power, and the wraith hovered, its eyeless face a servant to a greater force. Clara saw it now, the shadowy figure from her earlier vision, its cloak a void, its voice a serpent's hiss. "I am Molthorn," it declared, its name a curse that burned the air. "This convent is my gate, and your blood is my key." Agnes knelt, offering the chest's bone shard, but Eleanor, chained and bleeding, screamed in defiance. "You're selling our souls," she cried, struggling against her bonds. Molthorn laughed, its form rippling, and revealed the vow's truth. The wraith was its herald, binding the convent to a demonic realm, and each sacrifice strengthened the gate. "A child's blood every 40 years, Molthorn said, "or I claim all." Eleanor spat at it, her faith unbroken, and Agnes, enraged, carved the vow symbol deeper into her arm, marking her as a traitor. But Eleanor's defiance sparked a rebellion. Sister Margaret, guilt-ridden, slipped a vial of holy water into Eleanor's hand, whispering, "The dagger can wound it." Eleanor used the water to burn her chains, escaping as Malthorn's laughter shook the crypt. She hid the dagger in the catacombs, vowing to return, but her pregnancy, Clara's existence, forced her to flee. The vision snapped back, and Clara staggered, Evelyn steadying her. "Your mother fought," the girl said, her voice eerily calm. "Now it's you." Clara's eyes burned with tears, the dagger's purpose clear. It could harm Malthorn, not just the wraith. But the crypt's altar pulsed, and Beatrice's voice echoed from the shadows. "You're too late, Clara." The Mother Superior emerged, her medallion glowing, her hands stained with blood. Behind her, a rift opened in the air, a shimmering gate, Malthorn's realm seeping through. Clara raised the dagger, Evelyn at her side, knowing the battle was only beginning. The crypt's air crackled as the rift pulsed, a tear in reality that bled shadow and heat, Malthorn's demonic realm clawing at the world. Clara faced Beatrice, the blessed dagger gleaming in her hand. Evelyn pressed close, her small frame trembling but defiant. Beatrice's eyes were wild, her medallion a beacon of the vow's power, and the blood on her hands dripped onto the altar, feeding the rift. "You've broken nothing," Beatrice hissed. "Evelyn's blood will seal the gate, and Malthorn will spare us." Clara's rage flared, the memory of her mother's sacrifice fueling her. "You're a pawn," she said, her voice steady. "Malthorn uses you, just as it used Agnes." Beatrice laughed, but her hands shook, betraying her fear. The rift widened, and the wraith reappeared, its form rebuilt, its claws now wreathed in flame. "The vessel belongs to us," it roared, lunging for Evelyn. Clara swung the dagger, its blade slicing through the wraith's arm, which dissolved into ash, but the creature kept coming, its strength bolstered by the rift. Clara pushed Evelyn behind the altar, shouting, "Stay down." The girl obeyed, her eyes locked on the rift, as if seeing something Clara couldn't. Beatrice chanted in Latin, her voice rising, and the rift's pull grew stronger, dragging debris toward it. Clara's habit tore, her hair whipping in the unnatural wind, but she held her ground, the dagger her only anchor. The wraith slashed at her, its claws grazing her shoulder, and pain seared through her. She stumbled, blood dripping onto the altar, and the rift flared, Malthorn's laughter echoing. Clara's vision blurred, but Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. "Your blood," the girl cried. "It's fighting it." Clara realized her blood, tied to Eleanor's defiance, weakened the rift. She slashed her palm with the dagger, letting her blood spill onto the altar, and the rift flickered, the wraith screaming in agony. Beatrice lunged, grabbing Evelyn, her medallion burning against the girl's skin. "You'll not ruin this," she shrieked, dragging Evelyn toward the rift. Clara tackled Beatrice, the dagger flashing, and cut the medallion's chain, sending it clattering to the floor. The rift pulsed violently, and the wraith turned on Beatrice, its claws tearing into her arm. She screamed, releasing Evelyn, and Clara pulled the girl to safety. The crypt shook, stones falling, and Clara knew they had to close the rift before Malthorn fully emerged. She clutched the dagger, her blood still dripping, and prepared to strike the altar, but Beatrice's voice, now desperate, stopped her. "You'll die, Clara. Your blood is the gate's key, too." Clara stood frozen in the crypt, the dagger raised, her blood pooling on the altar as the rift's glow cast eerie shadows across her face. Beatrice's words, "Your blood is the gate's key," echoed, a chilling truth that linked Clara to the vow as much as Evelyn. The wraith, weakened but relentless, circled them, its fiery claws dripping ash, while Beatrice, clutching her bleeding arm, staggered to her feet, her eyes gleaming with fanaticism. Evelyn huddled behind Clara, her small hands clutching the prayer book Clara had dropped, its blood-stained flower glinting in the rift's light. The crypt's shaking intensified, and Clara's resolve wavered. If her blood could close the rift, it might cost her life, but Evelyn's safety, and Daniel's, drove her forward. She raised the dagger, aiming for the altar's pentagram, when a shout broke through the chaos. "Clara!" Daniel stumbled into the crypt, his wounds bandaged but his face pale, his pistol raised. Ruth followed, her hands trembling but her presence acquired strength. Daniel's eyes locked on Clara, his love for her raw and unspoken, and she felt a surge of hope, her heart aching with the weight of their forbidden bond. Daniel fired at the wraith, the bullet sparking but slowing it, giving Clara time. He reached her, his hand gripping her arm, steadying her. "You don't do this alone," he said, his voice hoarse. Clara nodded, tears blurring her vision, and handed him the prayer book, its flower a symbol of her mother's fight. "If I fall," she whispered, "protect Evelyn." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he took the book, his fingers lingering on hers, a promise in his touch. Beatrice lunged for the medallion, chanting to widen the rift, and the wraith attacked, its claws aiming for Evelyn. Daniel shoved the girl aside, taking a slash across his back, and collapsed, blood pooling. Clara screamed, her rage overtaking her fear, and drove the dagger into the altar, her blood mixing with the pentagram's stains. The rift convulsed, Malthorn's laughter turning to a scream, and the wraith faltered, its form fracturing. Ruth grabbed Evelyn, pulling her to safety, while Clara kept striking, each blow weakening the rift. Beatrice, now fully unhinged, grabbed the medallion and threw herself at Clara, her nails clawing at her face. "You'll burn with us," she shrieked. Clara wrestled her off, the dagger flashing, and cut Beatrice's hand, sending the medallion into the rift. The gate pulsed violently, sucking Beatrice toward it, her screams fading as she vanished. The wraith howled, its form collapsing, but the rift remained, and Clara knew Malthorn was still there, waiting. She fell to her knees beside Daniel, his hand weak in hers, and realized the true cost of the vow was yet to come. The crypt of St. Bridget's convent pulsed with an unholy light, the rift in the air, a jagged tear to Malthorn's demonic realm, throbbing like a wound. Clara Kane knelt beside Daniel Shea, her hands slick with his blood as she pressed against the gash on his back, her heart tearing between fear for him and the battle ahead. The blessed dagger lay beside her, its blade stained with her own blood, which had weakened the rift but not closed it. Evelyn, the 7-year-old vessel of the vow, stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the rift, while Sister Ruth, trembling but resolute, held her hand, whispering prayers that felt hollow in the face of such evil. The wraith was gone, its form shattered by Clara's attack on the altar, but Malthorn's laughter echoed, a sound like grinding bones, promising retribution. The crypt's walls worked black ichor, and the air grew heavy, pulling at Clara's limbs as if the rift hungered for her. Beatrice's final words, "Your blood is the gate's key," rang in her mind, a chilling truth that tied Clara's lineage to the vow's curse. Her mother, Eleanor, had defied the pact, and now Clara bore its weight, her blood a beacon for Malthorn. Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open, his voice a ragged whisper. "Clara, don't let it take you." His hand found hers, weak but warm, and she choked back a sob, the love she felt for him a fire that burned against her vows. "I won't," she promised, but doubt gnawed at her. She stood, the dagger in one hand, the cracked blood-chest remains at her feet, and faced the rift. Its edges pulsed, and a clawed hand, black, sinewy, and impossibly large, reached through, scraping the stone floor. Ruth screamed, pulling Evelyn back, but the girl's voice was calm, almost otherworldly. "It wants me, but it fears you," she said to Clara. "Your mother's blood, it's holy." Clara's breath caught, the memory of Eleanor's defiance in 1943 flashing through her mind. She slashed her palm again, letting her blood drip onto the dagger, and thrust it toward the rift. The clawed hand recoiled, Malthorn's scream shaking the crypt, and the rift flickered, but it held, its hunger growing. Footsteps echoed, nuns, their faces pale and eyes glowing with Malthorn's influence, poured into the crypt, their chants a low drone. Clara spun, the dagger raised, as Daniel struggled to his knees, grabbing a fallen candelabrum as a weapon. "Go for the altar," he gasped. "I'll hold them." Clara hesitated, her heart breaking, but Evelyn's tug on her hand spurred her forward. She and the girl ran for the pentagram, the dagger glowing with her blood, as Daniel fought the nuns, his strength fading. The rift pulsed, and Clara knew time was running out. Clara's boots skidded on the crypt's blood-slicked floor as she reached the altar, Evelyn at her side, the dagger's glow casting eerie shadows. The rift's pull was relentless, and Malthorn's claw scraped closer, its presence a crushing weight. Clara's vision blurred, the crypt dissolving into another vision of 1943, her mother's final act of rebellion against the vow. Eleanor stood in the catacombs, her habit torn, her arm bleeding from Agnes's cuts. The blessed dagger was in her hand, stolen from the ritual chamber, its blade etched with holy runes. Sister Margaret, her ally, lay dead at her feet, killed by Agnes for her betrayal. The wraith hovered, its eyeless face a mask of hunger, but Eleanor's eyes were fixed on Malthorn, the demon's shadowy form looming over the pentagram. "You'll not have this convent," she spat, her voice trembling but fierce. Malthorn laughed, its voice a storm. "Your blood is mine, Eleanor. Your child will serve me." Eleanor's hand tightened on the dagger, her pregnancy a secret she'd guarded, but her resolve was iron. She lunged, stabbing the pentagram, her blood mixing with the holy blade's power. The rift, then a smaller tear, shuddered, and the wraith screamed, its form fraying. Agnes attacked, her dagger slashing Eleanor's side, but Eleanor fought back, driving the blessed dagger into Agnes's shoulder. The Mother Superior fell, cursing, and Malthorn retreated, its gate weakened but not closed. Eleanor collapsed, the dagger slipping from her hand, and whispered a prayer for her unborn child, Clara. She hid the dagger in a sarcophagus, marking it with a pressed flower, and fled the convent, knowing Malthorn would hunt her. The vision snapped back, and Clara gasped, back in the crypt, the dagger burning in her hand. Evelyn's eyes were wide, as if she'd seen the vision too. "Your mother wounded it," the girl said. "You can finish it." Clara nodded, her mother's courage fueling her. She drove the dagger into the altar's pentagram, her blood flowing freely, and a rift convulsed, Malthorn's claw retreating. But the possessed nuns overwhelmed Daniel, their claws tearing into him, and he fell, blood pooling. Clara screamed, her focus breaking, and the rift flared, Malthorn's voice booming. "Your love betrays you, Clara." Evelyn grabbed her hand, grounding her, and Clara struck the altar again, the dagger's light blinding. The nuns faltered, their glow dimming, but Daniel lay still, and Clara's heart shattered, her mission hanging by a thread. The crypt's air was a furnace, the rift's light searing Clara's skin as she stood over the altar, the blessed dagger embedded in the pentagram, her blood pooling around it. Evelyn clung to her side, her small frame a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, while the possessed nuns staggered, their connection to Moldhorn weakening. Daniel lay motionless, his blood staining the stone, and Clara's soul tore between saving him and closing the rift. The demon's voice, Malthorn's, rolled through the crypt like thunder. "Give me the vessel, and I spare your lover." Clara's hand shook, the dagger's glow flickering as her resolve wavered. She looked at Evelyn, the child marked by the vow, and saw her mother's eyes in the girl's, defiant, unbroken. "No," Clara said, her voice steady despite her tears. "You get nothing." She twisted the dagger deeper, and the rift screamed, its edges fraying, but Malthorn's claw burst through, larger now, its scales glinting like obsidian. It swiped at Evelyn, and Clara Dove, shielding the girl, the claw grazing her back, tearing flesh. Ruth rushed forward, grabbing a fallen cross from the altar and thrusting it at the claw. The holy symbol burned, and Moldhorn recoiled, giving Clara time to stand. She pulled the dagger free, her blood dripping, and faced the rift, the prayer book's flower falling from her habit. Evelyn picked it up, pressing it into Clara's hand. "Use it," the girl whispered, her voice eerily calm. Clara understood, Eleanor's blood, preserved in the flower, was a weapon. She crushed the petals, mixing them with her blood, and smeared the paste onto the dagger, its blade flaring with divine light. The possessed nuns attacked again, their numbers growing as Moldhorn summoned more. Ruth fought bravely, swinging the cross, but a nun's claw slashed her arm, and she fell, crying out. Clara's heart pounded, but she focused on the rift, chanting the Latin from the dagger, In nomine Dei, French vinculum. She stabbed the altar, the flower's blood amplifying the blade's power, and the rift collapsed inward, Malthorn's claw trapped, its screams deafening. The nuns dropped, their glow extinguished, but the rift wasn't closed, only weakened. Clara ran to Daniel, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse. It was faint, but there, and she wept, pressing her forehead to his. "Hold on," she whispered, her love for him a sin she embraced. Evelyn's voice broke through. "It's not done," she said, pointing to the altar, where the pentagram glowed anew. Clara realized Moldhorn was playing for time, waiting to fully emerge. She stood, the dagger ready, knowing the final strike might claim her life. The crypt's walls trembled, the rift's light pulsing erratically as Malthorn's trapped claw thrashed, its scales cracking the stone floor. Clara stood at the altar, the blessed dagger in one hand, the blood-soaked flower's remnants in the other, her body aching from wounds but her spirit unbroken. Evelyn knelt beside Ruth, who clutched her bleeding arm, her prayers a faint murmur. Daniel's shallow breaths echoed in Clara's ears, each one a reminder of what she could lose. The pentagram glowed, Malthorn's voice a venomous whisper. "Your blood or the child's, Clara? Choose." Clara's eyes burned with defiance, her mother's legacy, Eleanor's fight against the vow, guiding her. She looked at Evelyn, the girl's face pale but resolute, and knew she couldn't sacrifice her. "My blood," Clara said, her voice ringing. She slashed her wrist, deeper than before, and let it pour onto the pentagram, the dagger's blade pressed against the stone. The rift screamed, its light dimming, and Malthorn's claw withered, its scales crumbling. The demon's roar was desperate now, its power slipping. The remaining possessed nuns stirred, their bodies twitching as Molthorn fought to regain control. Clara's vision blurred, her strength fading with her blood, but she kept chanting, the Latin words a lifeline. Evelyn grabbed her hand, a small voice joining the prayer, and Ruth, despite her wounds, crawled to the altar, adding her own. The combined faith shook the crypt, and the rift began to close, its edges knitting together. Malthorn's voice grew frantic. "You cannot banish me." Clara's knees buckled, but she held the dagger, its light blinding. She saw Daniel stir, his eyes opening, and her heart surged, giving her strength. "For you," she whispered, and drove the dagger into the pentagram center, her blood and Eleanor's flower fusing with the blade. The rift collapsed, a shockwave blasting through the crypt, knocking the nuns down and extinguishing the pentagram's glow. Malthorn's claw vanished, its scream fading, but Clara felt its presence linger, trapped but not destroyed. She fell, her blood pooling, and Evelyn caught her, sobbing. Ruth staggered to Daniel, helping him sit, his eyes fixed on Clara with desperate love. "You did it," he rasped, crawling to her. Clara smiled weakly, her hand finding his, their fingers entwining despite the sin. The crypt was silent, the rift gone, but Evelyn's whisper chilled her. "It's not over," the girl said, her eyes on the altar, where a faint crack glowed. Clara knew Molthorn was sealed, but the vow's curse remained, and her blood had only bought them time. The crypt of St. Bridget's convent lay in ruin, its stones cracked, its altar scarred from Clara Kane's blood-soaked strike. The rift to Malthorn's demonic realm was closed, a faint crack in the air the only remnant, but the air thrummed with a latent menace, as if the demon's essence had seeped into the convent itself. Clara knelt, her wrist bleeding, her body weak from the sacrifice that had sealed the gate. The blessed dagger, its blade dim but still warm, rested beside her, stained with her blood and the crushed remnants of her mother's flower. Evelyn, the child marked by the vow, clung to her, her eyes wide with fear and awe, while Daniel Shea, barely alive, leaned against Ruth, his wounds a map of their desperate fight. Clara's vision swam, but Daniel's hand, weak but insistent, found hers, his touch a lifeline. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice raw, his eyes burning with a love that defied their vows. Clara's heart ached, the sin of her feelings for him a weight she could no longer deny. She squeezed his hand, her voice barely audible. "For you." But Evelyn's warning, "It's not over," echoed, and a crack in the air pulsed, a low hum that made Clara's skin crawl. Molthorn was sealed, but the vow's curse, tied to her blood, was alive. Ruth, her arm bandaged but her spirit unbroken, helped Daniel stand, her face etched with guilt for her earlier possession. "The convent's changing," she said, her voice trembling. "The nuns, they're gathering in the chapel." Clara's stomach twisted. The possessed nuns, freed when the rift closed, were now directionless, but Malthorn's influence lingered, and Beatrice's absence left a void of power. Clara stood, swaying, and picked up the dagger, its weight a reminder of her mother's fight. "We need to stop this," she said, looking at Evelyn. "You're not safe yet." They moved through the crypt's rubble, the convent's corridors now walked, their walls pulsing with dark veins that oozed ichor. The air was thick, the candles extinguished, and whispers, not the wraiths, but Malthorn's, slithered through the shadows. Clara led, Evelyn's hand in hers, Daniel and Ruth behind, their steps echoing like a funeral march. In the chapel, they found the nuns, their faces blank, kneeling before the altar, where Beatrice's medallion lay, glowing with an unholy light. The crack in the crypt had spread, a thin fissure now snaking through the chapel's floor, and Clara realized Molthorn was fighting to return, using the convent as its anchor. A nun turned, her eyes glowing, and lunged, her nails claw-like. Daniel shoved Ruth aside, taking the blow, and Clara swung the dagger, its blade cutting through the nun's arm, which dissolved into ash. The others rose, their chants rising, and Clara knew they were lost to Molthorn's will. She grabbed the medallion, its heat burning her hand, and the fissure widened, Molthorn's laughter shaking the chapel. "We have to destroy it," she shouted, her blood dripping onto the medallion, weakening its glow. But the nuns closed in, and Clara feared they were out of time. The chapel's chaos blurred as Clara clutched the medallion, its heat searing her palm, and a vision dragged her back to 1943, revealing the convent's darkest hour. Eleanor, Clara's mother, stood in the chapel, her body bruised from her escape from the crypt, the blessed dagger hidden in her habit. The convent was in turmoil, the war's shadow looming, and Sister Agnes, wounded but unyielding, rallied the nuns to renew the vow. The wraith hovered, its eyeless face a servant to Molthorn, whose shadowy form pulsed in the altar's pentagram, the blood chest at its center. Eleanor pleaded with the nuns, her voice breaking. "This pact damns us. Molthorn will never let us go." But Agnes's zeal was unshakable, her arm bleeding from Eleanor's earlier strike. "The orphans need us," she said, pointing to the children huddled in the pews, their faces pale with hunger. "Molthorn protects them." Eleanor's eyes fell on a girl, barely 5, marked as the next sacrifice, and her heart shattered. She drew the dagger, its blade glowing, and lunged for the chest, aiming to destroy it. Agnes intercepted, her dagger clashing with Eleanor's, and the nuns turned on her, their faith twisted by fear. Molthorn's laughter filled the chapel, its form growing as the pentagram flared. "Her blood will serve," it hissed, and Agnes slashed Eleanor's arm, the vow symbol deepening. But Eleanor fought back, her faith stronger than her pain, and drove the blessed dagger into the pentagram, her blood mixing with its holy power. The rift flickered, Molthorn's form fraying, and the wraith screamed, its hold weakening. The nuns hesitated, some breaking free of Molthorn's sway, but Agnes rallied them, sacrificing another child to stabilize the rift. Eleanor, wounded and outnumbered, fled to the catacombs, hiding the dagger and swearing to protect her unborn child, Clara, from the vow. The vision snapped back, and Clara gasped, back in the chapel, the medallion burning in her hand. Evelyn's eyes met hers, as if she'd seen the vision too. "Your mother broke their faith," the girl said. "You can break the vow." Clara nodded, her mother's courage afire in her chest. She smashed the medallion against the altar, her blood coating it, and the fissure pulsed, Molthorn's scream shaking the convent. The possessed nuns attacked, their claws slashing, and Daniel, despite his wounds, fought beside Clara, his candelabrum swinging. Ruth shielded Evelyn, her cross raised, but the fissure widened, and a clawed shadow, Molthorn's true form, began to emerge, its eyes burning with hunger. The chapel of St. Bridget's convent was a battlefield, its stained glass windows shattering as Molthorn's clawed shadow breached the fissure, its massive form a blend of scale and shadow, its eyes like twin furnaces. Clara stood at the altar, the blessed dagger in one hand, the broken medallion in the other, her blood dripping onto the stone, weakening the demon's hold. Evelyn clung to Ruth, who wielded her cross with trembling hands, while Daniel fought the possessed nuns, his strength fading, his blood staining the floor. The vow's curse pulsed through Clara, her connection to Eleanor making her both weapon and target. Malthorn's voice was a roar. "Your blood opens the gate, Clara. Surrender, and I spare the child." Clara's heart wavered, the memory of Daniel's touch, Evelyn's trust, and Ruth's courage anchoring her. She looked at Daniel, his eyes pleading despite his pain, and knew she couldn't give in. "You'll have nothing," she said, driving the dagger into the altar, her blood flowing freely. The fissure flickered, Malthorn's claw retreating, but the demon's power surged, and the nuns attacked with renewed ferocity, their claws tearing into Daniel's arm. Ruth thrust her cross at a nun, its holy power burning, and shouted, "Clara, the prayer book." Clara grabbed Eleanor's prayer book from Evelyn, its pages falling open to a handwritten prayer, a banishment rite Eleanor had scrawled. Clara chanted, her voice rising, and Evelyn joined, her small voice amplifying the words. The nuns faltered, some collapsing, their glow dimming, but Malthorn's shadow grew, its claws slashing the air, narrowly missing Evelyn. Clara's vision blurred, her blood loss critical, but she kept chanting, the dagger's light flaring. Daniel staggered to her side, his hand finding hers, their fingers entwining, their love a defiance of the demon's power. Together, he whispered, and they drove the dagger deeper, the prayer book's words shaking the chapel. The fissure began to close, Malthorn's shadow thrashing, its screams deafening. Ruth pulled Evelyn to safety, but a nun grabbed Clara, her claws digging into her shoulder, and Daniel tackled her off, taking another wound. The chapel shook, the altar cracking, and Clara realized the banishment wasn't enough, Malthorn was too strong. She looked at Evelyn, the girl's eyes clear, and knew the vow's final cost. "My blood," she said, her voice steady. She slashed her wrist deeper, letting it pour onto the altar, and the fissure collapsed further, Malthorn's shadow trapped. But Clara's strength faded, and she fell, Daniel catching her, his tears mixing with her blood. The chapel's air was a maelstrom, the fissure's light dimming as Clara's blood pooled on the altar, the blessed dagger embedded in its center. Malthorn's shadow writhed, its massive form half-trapped, its claws scraping the stone, its eyes burning with rage. Clara lay in Daniel's arms, her vision fading, her wrist bleeding too fast, the vow's curse claiming her life. Evelyn stood frozen, Ruth's arm around her, the prayer book clutched in her small hands, its banishment rite still echoing. The possessed nuns lay scattered, their bodies still, but Malthorn's voice roared, "You cannot bind me, Clara. Your soul is mine." Daniel's tears fell onto Clara's face, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, Clara. Please." His love, raw and forbidden, gave her strength, and she gripped his hand, her eyes finding Evelyn's. The girl's words from the crypt, "Your mother's blood is holy," rang in her mind. Clara's blood, tied to Eleanor's defiance, was the key, but it wasn't enough. She needed faith, hers, Daniel's, Evelyn's, to finish what her mother started. Clara whispered to Daniel, "The prayer, finish it." He nodded, taking the prayer book, his voice joining Ruth's and Evelyn's as they chanted the banishment rite. Clara pulled the dagger free, her blood coating its blade, and staggered to her feet, Daniel supporting her. She faced Malthorn, the demon's shadow now a towering mass of bone and flame, its claws reaching for Evelyn. "You end here," Clara said, her voice weak but fierce, and drove the dagger into the fissure's crack, her blood and the prayer's power fusing. The chapel exploded in light, the fissure collapsing, Malthorn's shadow shattering into fragments that burned away. The demon's scream was a death knell, its claws dissolving, but the altar cracked, and a final pulse of dark energy surged, knocking Clara back. She fell, her blood spent, and Daniel caught her, his sobs shaking them both. Evelyn ran to her, pressing the prayer book to Clara's chest, its flower glowing faintly. "You did it," the girl whispered, tears streaming. The chapel stilled, the fisher gone, the nuns' bodies lifeless. Ruth knelt beside Clara, her prayers fervent, but Clara's pulse was faint, her life slipping. Daniel held her, his lips brushing her forehead, a sin he embraced. "I love you," he whispered, his voice raw. Clara smiled, her hand weak in his, and whispered, "I know." But Evelyn's eyes widened, a shadow flickering in them, and Clara realized Malthorn's curse wasn't fully broken, the vow's final price was yet to be paid. The chapel of St. Bridget's convent lay in eerie silence, its shattered windows casting fractured moonlight across the blood-streaked altar. Clara Kane slumped in Daniel Shay's arms, her wrist a crimson ruin, her life ebbing with each shallow breath. The blessed dagger, its blade dimmed by her sacrifice, rested in her limp hand, and the prayer book, its blood-stained flower glowing faintly, pressed against her chest. Evelyn, the 7-year-old vessel of the vow, knelt beside her, tears streaming down her pale face, while Sister Ruth, her own wounds bleeding through her bandages, prayed fervently, her voice a desperate plea against the lingering curse. Malthorn's shadow was gone, the rift sealed, but Evelyn's warning, "It's not over," hung heavy, and a faint pulse emanated from the cracked altar, the vow's final echo. Daniel's tears fell onto Clara's face, his voice breaking as he held her. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his love a raw wound that defied their vows. His wounds, gashes across his back and arm, bled freely, but he ignored them, his focus on Clara. Her eyes fluttered, meeting his, and she managed a weak smile, her fingers brushing his. "Save Evelyn," she rasped, her voice fading. The chapel's air grew cold, and the altar's crack widened, a low hum rising, as if Malthorn's essence, though banished, had left a poison in the vow's roots. Evelyn's small hand tightened on the prayer book, her eyes darting to the altar. "It's in me," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "The vow, it's not gone." Clara's heart, though weak, surged with fear. She struggled to sit, Daniel supporting her, and saw a shadow flicker in Evelyn's eyes, not Malthorn, but the vow's curse, a parasitic bond tying the girl to the convent's dark pact. Ruth's prayers faltered, her face pale. "The nuns," she said, pointing to the bodies scattered around the chapel. "They are moving." The possessed nuns, thought dead, twitched, their limbs jerking like marionettes. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with Malthorn's power but with the vow's residual malice, a failsafe to protect the pact. Clara's blood had sealed the rift, but the vow demanded a final price, Evelyn's life, or Clara's. She gripped the dagger, its blade flaring weakly, and stood, swaying, her resolve unbroken. "No more sacrifices," she said, her voice fierce despite her fading strength. The nuns lunged, their claws slashing, and Daniel fought them off, his candelabrum swinging, his body shielding Clara and Evelyn. Ruth grabbed a fallen cross, its holy power burning a nun's flesh, but the numbers overwhelmed them. Clara raised the dagger, her blood dripping onto the altar, and chanted the banishment rite from the prayer book, her voice joined by Evelyn's. The nuns faltered, but the altar's hum grew, and a spectral form, not the wraith, but Agnes, the vow's architect, emerged, her decayed face twisted with rage. "You cannot break what is eternal," she hissed, reaching for Evelyn. Clara's blood boiled, and she knew the final battle was hers alone. The chapel's there was a storm of shadow and light, Agnes's spectral form looming over the altar, her clawed hands reaching for Evelyn, the vow's last vessel. Clara stood defiant, the blessed dagger glowing faintly in her blooded hand, her body on the brink of collapse but her spirit fueled by her mother's legacy and her love for Daniel and Evelyn. The possessed nuns closed in, their jerky movements driven by the vow's curse, while Daniel fought desperately, his wounds reopening, his strength nearly spent. Ruth shielded Evelyn, her cross raised, but her face was pale, her own injuries slowing her. Agnes's voice was a venomous hiss. "Your blood began this, Clara. It ends with you." Clara's mind flashed to 1943, Eleanor's defiance against Agnes, her sacrifice to protect her unborn child. The vow's curse, tied to their bloodline, demanded a life to sustain it, and Clara realized her mother's warning, "The vow is a lie," meant it could be broken, but at a cost. She looked at Evelyn, the girl's eyes clear despite the shadow within, and knew she couldn't let her die. Clara staggered to the altar, the dagger raised, her wrist bleeding freely. "Take me," she said, her voice ringing. Not her. Daniel's shout, "Clara, no!" cut through the chaos, but she ignored it, her focus on Agnes. She drove the dagger into the altar's crack, her blood pouring into the stone, and chanted the banishment rite, her voice a beacon. The chapel shook, the nuns collapsing, their glow extinguishing, and Agnes screamed, her form fraying. The vow's curse pulsed, fighting to claim Evelyn, but Clara's blood, holy through Eleanor's faith, overwhelmed it. Evelyn gasped, the shadow leaving her eyes, and fell into Ruth's arms, free at last. But Clara's strength gave out, her body crumpling, the dagger clattering to the floor. Daniel caught her, his tears streaming, his voice a desperate plea. "You can't leave me," he said, his lips brushing hers, a kiss that broke every vow but sealed their love. Clara's hand found his, a smile faint. "You're enough," she whispered, her eyes closing. The altar's crack sealed, the hum fading, but the chapel's walls groaned, and a final pulse of dark energy surged, a remnant of Malthorn's power. Ruth clutched Evelyn, her prayers fervent, and Daniel held Clara, his heart breaking. The nun's body stilled, the curse broken, but Clara's pulse was nearly gone, her sacrifice the vow's final price. Evelyn's small voice broke the silence. "She's not gone," she said, pressing the prayer book to Clara's chest, its flower glowing. The chapel's light shifted, and a faint warmth enveloped Clara, as if Eleanor's spirit lingered, offering one last chance. The chapel of St. Bridget's convent stood silent, its air heavy with the aftermath of the vow's destruction. Clara lay motionless in Daniel's arms, her blood pooling on the stone, the blessed dagger at her side, its light extinguished. The altar's crack was gone, the vow's curse broken, and Evelyn, free of the shadow, knelt beside Clara, the prayer book in her small hands, its blood-stained flower pulsing faintly. Sister Ruth, her wounds a testament to her courage, prayed softly, her voice a thread of hope in the darkness. The possessed nuns lay dead, their bodies finally at rest, but the convent felt alive, its stones trembling with the echo of Malthorn's defeat. Daniel's sobs shook his frame, his lips pressed to Clara's forehead, his love for her a fire that burned through his pain. "Come back," he whispered, his voice raw, his wounds bleeding but ignored. Evelyn's words, "She's not gone," hung in the air, and the prayer book's flower flared, its light enveloping Clara. A vision flashed in Daniel's mind, Eleanor, radiant, standing in the chapel, a hand on Clara's heart. Her faith is yours, Eleanor said, her voice a whisper. Believe. Daniel clutched the prayer book, his Catholic training resurfacing, and joined Ruth's prayer, his voice hoarse but fervent. Evelyn's small hand touched Clara's, and the flower's light intensified, its warmth spreading through Clara's body. Her chest rose, a faint breath escaping, and her eyes fluttered open, meeting Daniel's. You stayed, she whispered, her voice weak but alive. Daniel wept, his lips brushing hers, a sin they both embraced, their love a defiance of the vow's curse. The chapel's walls stilled, the dark energy gone, and the convent's oppressive weight lifted, as if Malthorn's influence had finally vanished. Clara sat up, supported by Daniel, her wrist no longer bleeding, the flower's light healing her. Evelyn smiled, her face unburdened, and Ruth collapsed, her prayers turning to sobs of relief. The vow was broken, its curse shattered by Clara's blood and their collective faith, but the cost was etched in their scars, Seamus's death, Beatrice's betrayal, and the nuns lost to Malthorn's power. Clara looked at the altar, the dagger now a simple blade, its purpose fulfilled. It's over, she said, but Evelyn's hand tightened on hers. Not yet, the girl whispered, her eyes on the chapel's door, where a faint shadow lingered, not Malthorn, but the convent's own darkness, a reminder of its tainted history. Clara stood, leaning on Daniel, the prayer book in her hand, and knew the final act was theirs to write. Act 3 ended with the curse broken, Clara alive, and Evelyn safe, but the convent's secret still whispered, setting up Act 4's reckoning with the past. The dawn broke over St. Bridget's convent, its pale light filtering through shattered stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the chapel's blood-stained floor. Clara Kane stood weak but alive, supported by Daniel Shea, her hands still clasped in his, their forbidden love a quiet fire that had defied the vow's curse. The blessed dagger lay on the altar, its blade dull, its purpose fulfilled, while Eleanor's prayer book, its blood-stained flower now ash, rested beside it. Evelyn, the 7-year-old freed from the vow's grip, clung to Sister Ruth, her small face etched with relief but shadowed by the convent's lingering dread. The air was still, Malthorn's demonic presence vanished, but the chapel's walls seemed to whisper, as if the convent itself held secrets yet to be purged. Clara's body ached, her wrists scarred from her sacrifice, but her hazel eyes burned with determination. The vow was broken, its curse shattered by her blood and their faith, but Evelyn's warning, not yet, echoed, a reminder that the convent's darkness was rooted deeper than Malthorn. Daniel's wounds, bandaged but seeping, made his every movement a struggle, yet his gaze never left Clara, his love a sin he embraced. "We need to leave," he said, his voice hoarse. "This place is poison." Clara nodded, but her heart tugged toward the convent's past. Her mother, Eleanor, had fought here, and Clara felt bound to finish her work. Ruth, her arm wrapped in torn cloth, looked at the scattered bodies of the nuns, their faces peaceful in death but a grim reminder of Malthorn's toll. "What about them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Clara's throat tightened. Seamus, Beatrice, and countless others had been lost to the vow's cruelty. "We honor them by ending this," she said, her voice steady. Evelyn's small hand found hers, and the girl's eyes, clear but haunted, met Clara's. "The crypt," she whispered. "It's still calling." Clara's blood chilled. The crypt, where she'd faced Malthorn's rift, was sealed, its altar destroyed, but Evelyn's words carried weight. The convent's foundation, its history of blood and betrayal, needed cleansing. Clara picked up the dagger, its weight a final burden, and led the group to the cloister, where the morning mist curled like a shroud. The convent groaned, its stones shifting, and Clara knew they had one last task, to burn away its darkness, even if it meant facing the ghosts of her own past. As they moved toward the crypt's entrance, Daniel's hand brushed hers, a silent vow to face it together, their love a fragile light in the dawn's shadow. The crypt's entrance yawned beneath the chapel, its rusted grate now twisted from the collapse that had nearly claimed them. Clara led the way, the blessed dagger in her hand, its blade cold but heavy with memory. Evelyn followed, her small steps resolute, while Daniel, leaning on Ruth for support, carried a lantern, its flickering light barely piercing the darkness. The air was stale, laced with the scent of ash and blood, and the walls bore scars from their battle with mold-horn, cracked stone, blackened pentagrams, and skeletal remains that seemed to watch their descent. Clara's heart pounded, the weight of her mother's legacy pressing against her. Eleanor had hidden the dagger here, fought Agnes here, and Clara felt her presence, a guiding warmth amidst the crypt's chill. Evelyn's whisper, "It's still calling," gnawed at her, and she wondered what remained of the vow's curse. The crypt opened into the ruined chamber, its altar shattered, the rift's crack gone, but a faint hum lingered, emanating from a sealed sarcophagus in the corner, unnoticed in their earlier chaos. Daniel set the lantern down, his face pale but determined, and helped Clara pry open the sarcophagus's lid. Inside lay a wooden box, its surface carved with the vow symbol, circle and jagged line, sealed with wax that bore Eleanor's initials. Clara's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The box contained a journal, its pages brittle, and a vial of dried blood, labeled Eleanor's offering. The journal was her mother's, its entries detailing her final days in 1943, after fleeing the convent. Eleanor wrote of a second ritual, hidden from Agnes, to bind Malthorn's essence to the crypt, using her blood as a holy seal. But the ritual was incomplete, requiring a descendant, Clara, to finish it, or the convent would remain a beacon for dark forces. Clara's eyes burned with tears, her mother's sacrifice a mirror to her own. "She knew I'd come," she whispered, clutching the vial. Daniel's hand rested on her shoulder, his touch grounding her, but his voice was tense. "This place is alive, Clara. We need to end it now." Evelyn's small voice broke the silence. "It's waking," she said, her eyes fixed on the sarcophagus, where the vow symbol glowed faintly. The hum grew louder, and the crypt's walls pulsed, dark veins snaking through the stone. Clara realized the convent's darkness wasn't mold-horn but the vow itself, a curse woven into its foundation, feeding on blood and despair. She opened the vial, its contents crumbling, and knew her blood was the key, but the crypt's awakening meant time was short, and the ghosts of St. Bridget's were stirring. The crypt's hum became a low roar, the dark veins in its walls pulsing like a heartbeat as Clara held Eleanor's journal and the vial's remnants, her blood the final key to end the vow's curse. Daniel stood beside her, his lantern flickering, his wounds slowing him but his resolve unbroken. Evelyn's warning, "It's waking," rang true, and the sarcophagus's glowing symbol flared, casting eerie light across the chamber. Ruth clutched her cross, her prayers faltering as the air grew frigid, and spectral forms began to coalesce, nuns, their faces decayed, their eyes hollow, not possessed but bound by the vow's lingering malice. Clara recognized them from her visions, Sister Margaret, who aided Eleanor, the sacrificed children, their small forms weeping, and Agnes, her spectral presence weaker but venomous. "You cannot erase us," Agnes hissed, her voice a chorus of despair. The ghosts circled, their hands reaching, not for Clara but Evelyn, as if the vow still craved her innocence. Clara raised the dagger, its blade flaring weakly, and stepped in front of the girl, her voice fierce. "You're done," she said, her blood dripping onto the journal, activating Eleanor's ritual. The ghosts recoiled, Margaret's form stepping forward, her face soft with sorrow. "Finish it, Clara," she whispered, her voice a plea. "Free us." Clara nodded, tears streaming, and read from the journal, chanting Eleanor's binding rite, her blood mixing with the vial's dust. The crypt shook, the veins retreating, but Agnes lunged, her claws slashing at Evelyn. Daniel tackled her spectral form, his body passing through but disrupting her, his candelabrum swinging uselessly. Ruth thrust her cross, its light burning Agnes, and Evelyn chanted with Clara, her small voice amplifying the rite. The ghosts wavered, some dissolving, but Agnes fought, her malice tied to the convent's foundation. Clara's blood flowed freely, her strength fading, and she realized the ritual required more, a final offering to seal the curse. She looked at Daniel, his eyes desperate, and knew her love for him, though a sin, was her strength. "Help me," she said, and he joined the chant, his voice raw, their hands entwining over the journal. The crypt's hum faltered, the ghosts fading, but Agnes's scream echoed, and the sarcophagus cracked, the dark mist rising, the vow's last defense. Clara's vision blurred, her blood loss critical, but Evelyn's hand on hers grounded her. "You're enough," the girl said, echoing Daniel's love. Clara drove the dagger into the sarcophagus, her blood sealing the ritual, and the mist screamed, dissolving. The ghosts vanished, the veins stilled, but the crypt groaned, its collapse imminent, and Clara knew they had to escape before St. Bridget's claimed them. The crypt of St. Bridget's convent shuddered, its walls crumbling as Clara's blood sealed Eleanor's ritual, banishing the vow's ghosts and its lingering curse. The blessed dagger, embedded in the sarcophagus, glowed faintly, its light fading as the dark mist dissolved, Agnes's final scream echoing into silence. Clara staggered, her body drained, her wrist a scarred testament to her sacrifice. Daniel caught her, his own wounds bleeding through his bandages, his love for her a fierce light in his eyes. Evelyn stood resolute, her small hand clutching Ruth's, while the nun, her cross still raised, wept with relief and exhaustion. The sarcophagus's symbol dimmed, the crypt's veins gone, but the chamber's collapse accelerated, stones falling like judgment. "We have to go," Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the rumble. Clara nodded, clutching Eleanor's journal, its pages now brittle ash, the vial empty. The ritual was complete, the vow's curse broken, but the convent itself, its stones steeped in blood, was rejecting them, as if purging its own history. Evelyn's eyes met Clara's, clear but haunted. "It's free," she whispered, and Clara knew the girl meant not just herself but the convent's souls, released at last. They ran for the stairs, Daniel supporting Clara, Ruth carrying Evelyn. The crypt ceiling buckled, dust choking the air, and the lantern shattered, plunging them into darkness. Clara's heart raced, the memory of her mother's escape guiding her, and she felt Eleanor's presence, a warm hand on her shoulder. They reached the grate, its twisted metal scraping their skin as they climbed, and burst into the cloister, the morning sun blinding after the crypt's gloom. The convent groaned, its spire swaying, and Clara realized it was falling, its foundation undone by the vow's end. They staggered to the courtyard, the mist parting to reveal the convent's final act, a fire, sparked by the chapel's candles, spreading through the dry timbers. The flames roared, consuming the altar, the nuns' bodies, and the vow's last traces. Clara watched, tears streaming, As St. Bridget's burned, its darkness purified but its secrets lost. Daniel's arm around her was a quiet vow, his love a sin they'd face together. Evelyn clung to Ruth, her future uncertain but free, and Clara knew their fight was over, but the cost, her faith, her mother's legacy, and the convent's fall, would haunt them forever. The flames of St. Bridget's convent roared against the dawn sky, a fire that consumed the Gothic spires and stained glass windows, reducing centuries of blood and betrayal to ash. Clara Kane stood in the courtyard, her scarred wrist throbbing, her torn habit fluttering in the heat. Daniel Shea, his wounds bandaged but his face pale, held her hand, their forbidden love a quiet strength that had carried them through the vow's curse. Evelyn, the 7-year-old freed from the demon Malthorn's grip, clung to Sister Ruth, her small frame silhouetted against the inferno, her eyes reflecting the fire but holding a spark of hope. The convent's collapse was a cleansing, but its weight lingered in Clara's heart, a testament to her mother Eleanor's sacrifice and her own. The fire's heat drove them back to the edge of the courtyard, where the Irish mist curled like a mourner's veil. Clara's gaze lingered on the ruins, the chapel's altar now a smouldering heap, the blessed dagger lost in the blaze, Eleanor's prayer book reduced to ash. The vow was broken, its curse sealed by Clara's blood and their faith, but the cost, Seamus's life, Beatrice's betrayal, the nun's fall, etched scars deeper than the ones on her skin. Daniel's voice, hoarse but steady, broke the silence. "It's over, Clara. You did what Eleanor couldn't." His hand tightened on hers, a sin they no longer hid, and she leaned into him, her heart torn between relief and guilt. Ruth, her arm wrapped in cloth, knelt beside Evelyn, whispering prayers of gratitude. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy. Clara looked at Evelyn, the girl's future a fragile promise, and knew they couldn't stay. The convent's darkness was gone, but its history would haunt the land, a warning to those who might rebuild. "We leave," Clara said, her voice firm. "Evelyn needs a home, not a grave." Evelyn's small hand found Clara's, her voice barely audible. "Will it come back?" she asked, her eyes searching the flames. Clara knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Not while we're here," she promised, though doubt flickered in her chest. The convent's fall felt final, but Malthorn's laughter, Agnes's spectral rage, lingered in her memory. She stood, helping Daniel, whose wounds slowed his steps, and led the group toward the convent's gate, where the dirt path stretched into the misty hills. The fire roared behind them, a requiem for St. Bridget's, and Clara felt Eleanor's presence, a warm breeze guiding them away. But as they passed the cemetery, a shadow flickered among the graves, not a demon but a memory, and Clara knew their journey wasn't truly over. The Irish countryside stretched before Clara, Daniel, Evelyn, and Ruth, its rolling hills cloaked in mist, the dawn's light a faint promise of peace. They walked the dirt path away from St. Bridget's, the convent's fire a distant glow, its smoke curling like a ghost into the sky. Clara's steps were heavy, her body weak from blood loss, but Daniel's arm around her was a steady anchor, his love a defiance of the vows they'd both broken. Evelyn held Ruth's hand, a small frame unburdened but her eyes haunted, as if the vow's shadow still lingered in her soul. The silence between them was heavy, each carrying the weight of their survival. They reached a crossroads, where a weathered sign pointed to a nearby village, its church spire visible through the fog. Clara paused, her scarred wrist aching, Eleanor's journal a memory burned into her mind. Her mother had fled this path, pregnant with Clara, to escape the vow's curse, and now Clara walked it, her own legacy uncertain. Daniel's voice, soft but firm, broke her thoughts. "You're not her, Clara. You broke the cycle." His eyes, bruised but warm, held hers, and she wanted to believe him, but the convent fall felt like a beginning, not an end. Ruth, her cross glinting in the light, looked at Evelyn, whose silence was a question no one could answer. "She needs a family," Ruth said, her voice trembling. "The church can help," but she trailed off, her faith shaken by the convent's horrors. Clara knelt before Evelyn, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady. "We'll find a place for you, somewhere safe." Evelyn's lips trembled, and she hugged Clara, her small arms fierce, trust that broke Clara's heart. A cart approached, driven by a grizzled farmer, his face lined with years but kind. He stopped, eyeing their blooded clothes and the smoke behind them. "Trouble at the convent?" he asked, his voice wary. Clara nodded, her throat tight. "It's gone," she said, "the truth await." The farmer offered them a ride to the village, and they climbed aboard, the cart's creak a stark contrast to the convent's roars. As they moved, Clara glanced back, the fire now a faint glow, and saw a figure in the mist, not Moulton, but Eleanor, her face serene, fading into the dawn. Clara's tears fell, her mother's redemption complete, but her own path lay ahead, shadowed by love and loss. The village of Kilbride was a cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley, its church a modest beacon against the misty hills. The farmer's cart rattled to a stop outside the rectory, where a priest, Father Michael, emerged, his face weathered but his eyes gentle. Clara, Daniel, Evelyn, and Ruth stepped down, their wounds and torn clothes a silent story of St. Bridget's fall. The farmer tipped his hat, whispering, "God be with ye," and drove off, leaving them in the village's quiet embrace, the convent smoke a distant smudge on the horizon. Father Michael ushered them inside, his rectory warm with the scent of bread and candle wax, a stark contrast to the convent's decay. Clara's body ached, her wrist scarred, but Daniel's presence beside her, his hand brushing hers, gave her strength. Evelyn sat close to Ruth, her silence a shield, while Ruth's cross hung heavy, her faith tested but enduring. The priest listened as Clara recounted their ordeal, her voice steady but heavy, Multhorn's rift, the vow's curse, Eleanor's sacrifice, and the convent's fire. She omitted their love, the sin that bound her to Daniel, but Father Michael's eyes saw more than she said. "You've carried a heavy burden," he said, his voice kind. "The church will care for the child." He looked at Evelyn, who met his gaze with quiet defiance, and Clara's heart twisted. She knew Evelyn needed more than the church, a family, a home free of shadows. "I'll stay with her," Clara said, surprising herself. Until she settled. Daniel's hand tightened on hers, a silent agreement, and Ruth nodded, her eyes wet. "I'll help," she said, her voice firm, reclaiming her purpose. Father Michael arranged rooms in the village, a widow's cottage for Evelyn and Clara, a barn loft for Daniel and Ruth. As they settled, Clara stood at the cottage window, watching the hills, the convent ruins invisible but ever present. Daniel joined her, his wounds bandaged, his face etched with pain and love. "What's next for us?" he asked, his voice low, the question a confession. Clara's vows, broken by their love, weighed heavy, but her heart was clear. "We find a way," she said, leaning into him, their future uncertain but theirs to forge. Outside, Evelyn played with village children, her laughter a fragile hope, but a shadow crossed Clara's mind, a whisper, not Multhorn's, but the convent's warning of secrets yet to surface. The days in Kilbride passed in a quiet rhythm, the village's simplicity a balm after St. Bridget's horrors. Clara, Daniel, Evelyn, and Ruth healed, their wounds scarring over, their spirits mending in the warmth of the widow's cottage and the church's care. Clara spent her mornings with Evelyn, teaching her to read, the girl's laughter a light that chased the vow's shadows. Daniel worked in the village, his strength returning, his love for Clara a quiet vow they no longer hid. Ruth found purpose in the church, her cross a symbol of faith renewed, though her eyes held the convent's weight. One evening, Clara stood on the hill overlooking Kilbride, the convent's ruins a distant scar, its fire long extinguished. Daniel joined her, his hand finding hers, their love a truth they'd face together, vows or not. "You're free," he said, his voice soft, but Clara shook her head, Eleanor's journal a memory etched in her soul. "Not yet," she said, her eyes on the horizon. The vow was broken, Molthorn banished, but the convent's secrets, its blood-soaked history, its unmarked graves, lingered, a debt she felt bound to settle. Evelyn ran to them, her face bright, a flower tucked in her hair, a gift from the village children. "Can we stay?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Clara knelt, her heart full. "For now," she said, hugging her, knowing Evelyn's future was theirs to protect. Ruth approached, her cross glinting, and smiled, her strength a quiet anchor. "The church is sending aid," she said. "They'll clear the ruins, bless the land." Clara nodded, relief mingling with unease. The convent's darkness was gone, but its story wasn't hers to bury. They returned to the cottage, the village's lights a constellation of hope. Clara sat by the fire, Daniel beside her, Evelyn asleep in her lap, Ruth praying softly. The widow, their host, offered tea, her eyes kind but curious, whispering of old tales, nuns who vanished, children who sang in the hills. Clara's hand tightened on Daniel's, the whispers a reminder that St. Bridget's legacy would endure, its ghosts not Molthorns but human, born of faith and failure. The screenplay ended with Clara looking out the window, the hills shrouded in mist, her love for Daniel and Evelyn alight, her path open but shadowed by the convent's unanswered questions, a haunting closure that lingered in the heart.